Tonight, we embark on a journey that delves into a chilling, often overlooked truth woven throughout history. The profound and tragic ways women's emotions, fears, and fundamental mental health were systematically misunderstood, ruthlessly misdiagnosed, and, in countless instances, cruelly punished. From the enigmatic medical theories of antiquity to the stark, confining walls of Victorian asylums, from the baffling label of hysteria to truly dangerous and invasive remedies, we are about to traverse centuries of treatments, some utterly bizarre, others heart-wrenchingly cruel, all once deemed not only acceptable but entirely normal. So, before you settle in, perhaps with a warm drink or a soft blanket, take a moment to engage with this video. A like, a subscription, but only if you genuinely find value in what we explore here. And please, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always truly moving to see how our stories connect across the globe. Now, with the screen as our portal, perhaps dim the lights, let a fan create a gentle, ambient hum, and allow yourselves to sink into the quiet contemplation of tonight's profound narrative. Let us begin our shared introspection in the sun-drenched, intellectually vibrant world of ancient Greece, a land famed for its philosophers, its rich tapestry of myths, and its, shall we say, remarkably imaginative medical theories. Picture this with me. It's the year 400 B.C.E. You are a woman living amidst the bustling city-states, and for weeks now, an unsettling malaise has crept into your days. Your chest feels an inexplicable tightness. Your heart capriciously races without any discernible cause, and at unpredictable moments, an overwhelming, suffocating wave of panic washes over you, leaving you breathless and disoriented. You seek counsel, attempting to articulate these disturbing sensations to the local healer, a figure of authority in his community. He listens, perhaps stroking his chin with an air of profound contemplation, before delivering his pronouncement. A wandering womb. Yes, you heard that right, a wandering womb. The esteemed Hippocrates himself, the very titan of medicine whose name graces the oath still taken by doctors today, genuinely propagated the belief that women's uteruses possessed an autonomous will, a mind of their own. According to his theory, if a woman became excessively emotional, perpetually anxious, or, remarkably, even too celibate, her uterus might simply decide to sever its anchors and embark on a leisurely tour of her internal anatomy, a lost tourist within her own body. It might ascend towards the chest, descend into the legs, or venture wherever its whimsical fancy led it. And the ensuing symptoms, the dizzy spells, the alarming breathlessness, the uncontrollable trembling, were attributed solely to this nomadic organ, wreaking its chaotic havoc. The prescribed treatment for this internal rebellion? Far from the comforting balm of a cozy blanket or a soothing herbal tea, physicians would strategically waft pleasant-smelling herbs near the pelvic region, hoping to entice the errant organ back to its rightful place, while simultaneously assaulting the nose with foul-smelling concoctions in an attempt to repel it from its upward journey. Imagine, for a moment, lying there, vulnerable, while someone performs what can only be described as a mystical seance for your uterus, waving pungent, burning garlic beneath your face. All, of course, presented with the utmost scientific conviction of the era. In a society where women were denied the fundamental rights to vote, to own land, or even to wear practical garments like pants, this utterly bizarre diagnosis became the only available explanation for female distress. Anxiety was not conceptualized as a complex mental or emotional experience. It was reductively framed as mere rogue reproductive behavior. To be fair, the ancient Greeks operated within the constraints of their limited scientific understanding. There were no intricate brain scans, no nascent serotonin theory, no concept of trauma-informed care. But still, to attribute every manifestation of distress to a misbehaving uterus is akin to your car inexplicably breaking down, and the mechanic, with a profound nod, declaring, "Ah, yes, the cup holder is wandering again." The poignant truth is that these ancient women were experiencing deep, visceral emotions, grief that tore at their souls, fears that stalked their nights, stress that weighed them down, and the gnawing uncertainty of their very existence. Yet, instead of being met with the compassionate question, "How do you feel?" they were instead offered incense and told that their womb was merely misaligned. And so, the silence began, not just the silence of misunderstood symptoms, but the far more insidious silence of unheard stories, buried beneath layers of medical conjecture and societal dismissal. Now, we drift across the Mediterranean into the grand, evolving empire of ancient Rome, a civilization lauded for its impressive advancements, its intricate plumbing systems, its formidable military, its comprehensive legal framework. Yet, when it came to compassion, particularly for the internal struggles of its women, progress was, well, still very much under construction. If you were a Roman woman grappling with the tendrils of anxiety, there was no benevolent therapist to consult, no sympathetic hotline to reach out to, and certainly no luxurious, stress-dissolving bath bomb to toss into the aqueduct. Instead, you would likely be advised, often with a dismissive wave of the hand, to marry, or to bear a child, or ideally, to accomplish both with expeditious efficiency. For according to the prevailing medical minds of the era, minds that, to no one's surprise, belonged almost exclusively to men, your profound emotional distress stemmed from a uterus that was simply underemployed. They did not call it anxiety. They bestowed upon it the imposing Latin moniker furor uterinus, which, ironically, sounds more like a formidable Roman battle formation than a diagnosis for emotional instability. But it was precisely their term for female emotional upheaval. And if you found yourself weeping excessively, or daring to speak out of turn in a patriarchal household, or appearing generally agitated and restless, the unspoken implication was clear. You were likely failing in your fundamental womanly duties. The prescribed cure? Childbirth, and often, repeatedly so. One notable Roman physician, Cyrenus of Ephesus, who commendably authored a comprehensive gynecological textbook, paradoxically advised women to assiduously avoid strong emotions altogether. Just cease the inconvenient business of feeling things. Problem solved. He did, to his credit, also recommend that husbands practice gentleness, though in Roman terms, this likely translated to little more than refraining from shouting too loudly during dinner. If you happen to be a wealthy Roman woman exhibiting signs of anxiety, you might be prescribed a refined regimen of wine and music, a seemingly pleasant palliative, until you remember that the underlying diagnosis was still rooted in the demeaning belief that your womb was malfunctioning, like a broken machine in a sophisticated bakery. For poorer women, the remedies were far more direct, often involving crude herbal mixtures, desperate spiritual rites, or, most commonly, being entirely ignored. And heaven forbid you ever dared to question your husband's authority, or neglected to smile demurely at dinner, or wept too long, too loudly, after the profound tragedy of a miscarriage. Such transgressions might earn you the dangerous label of unstable, or, far worse, the terrifying accusation of being possessed by malevolent spirits or unfavorably influenced by the capricious whims of the gods. Nothing quite embodies compassionate care like a bewildered priest brandishing chicken bones, chanting incantations over your sobbing form huddled on a cold marble bench. So, while Rome gifted us with magnificent roads, enduring laws, and breathtaking architecture, it offered its anxious women nothing but layers of shame, delicately wrapped in olive leaves. Their profound pain was meticulously medicalized, sternly moralized, and then utterly minimized. Because, in the final, dismissive analysis, no one genuinely inquired about the depths of their suffering. They simply asked when their next child was due. Now, let us walk softly, reverently, into the shadowy, labyrinthine corridors of the Middle Ages, a tumultuous era when armored knights roamed the land, devastating plagues bloomed with terrifying regularity, and if a woman dared to experience anxiety, it was almost certainly interpreted as a clear sign that Satan himself was collecting rent within her very soul. Medical understanding during this period didn't merely stall, it practically slammed into reverse, careening headlong into oncoming traffic. The ancient Greek theories of the wandering womb, though somewhat diminished, still stubbornly lingered, but now they were heavily seasoned with a generous, fear-inducing dose of holy fire and unholy panic. Women who exhibited what we now unequivocally recognize as anxiety, the uncontrollable trembling, the torrents of tears, the suffocating grip of panic attacks, the torment of intrusive thoughts, were routinely perceived as being spiritually compromised. Because, quite clearly, if your hands shook uncontrollably, or if you wept inconsolably into the lonely darkness of night, it could not possibly be the residue of trauma or overwhelming stress. Oh no, it was unequivocally demons. The church, an omnipresent and omnipotent force, utterly dominated the landscape of healing, and that healing often manifested in chilling forms. Terrifying exorcisms, public rituals of profound humiliation, or, if a woman's affliction escalated beyond the church's perceived control, the horrifying prospect of a bonfire with her name conspicuously emblazoned upon it. If a woman confided in someone about hearing voices, or simply appeared to be off, unconventional, detached, or too quiet, she could find herself ensnared in the terrifying net of witchcraft accusations. Herbal remedies, passed down through generations of female wisdom, suspicious. Knowledge of the stars, a natural curiosity, undoubtedly satanic. Crying too much, an outward manifestation of profound inner turmoil, clearly a wide-open gateway for malevolent evil in this unforgiving era. Anxiety wasn't simply misunderstood, it was actively, viscerally feared. And fear, when it took root within the body of the wrong woman, could lead to her being immured within the confines of a convent, violently dunked into a frigid river, or forced to stand trial in a courtroom where the damning evidence might include the testimony. She looked weird during Massachusetts. There were, it is true, monasteries and infirmaries where compassionate nuns attempted to care for women suffering from mental distress. But without any true, nascent understanding of the complex human mind, treatment invariably meant endless, rote prayers, enforced, isolating silence, and rigorous fasting. Because, as everyone knows, nothing soothes a tormented soul quite like the disorienting haze of low blood sugar and the echoing emptiness of total silence. And let us not overlook the rudimentary, often barbaric diagnostic tools of the day. If your anxiety caused you to faint without warning or to tremble uncontrollably, someone might press a consecrated cross to your forehead, vigilantly observing if you flinched. If you did, and who wouldn't, under such terrifying circumstances? Well, then you could bid a sorrowful farewell to your humble goats and prepare to make the acquaintance of the village torchbearer. It is a tragedy beyond measure, really. These women were not malevolent witches, nor inherent sinners, nor unwilling hosts for demonic spirits. They were simply human beings in excruciating pain. People desperately trying to draw breath through the crushing weight of sorrow, trying, often fruitlessly, to find sleep through the relentless grip of dread. But in a world constructed upon the very bedrock of fear, a woman who merely trembled became, instantly, a terrifying threat. And threats, in that era, were burned, not understood. Ah, the Renaissance, a luminous epoch hailed as a golden age of rebirth, a glorious flourishing of art, of nascent science, of profound literature. Everything, it seemed, was being enthusiastically rediscovered and celebrated. Everything. That is, except for, quite unfortunately, compassion for women's mental health. That particular facet of human understanding apparently remained securely locked away in a forgotten medieval cellar. While Michelangelo painstakingly chiseled the breathtaking form of David from cold marble, and Leonardo da Vinci brilliantly sketched his visionary designs for helicopters, doctors across Europe were still attempting, with frustrating futility, to unravel the perplexing mystery of why women dared to possess emotions. And, surprise, surprise, the leading, most persistently recycled theory was still the same tired villain, the uterus. Though ancient medical texts were indeed resurfaced and examined, they were often filtered through newer, supposedly more refined interpretations, which is merely a sophisticated euphemism for saying they still blamed women's emotional lives on the inconvenient fact of being too female. Anxious. That, dear lady, is because you remain unmarried. Panicking. You are clearly in urgent need of conception. Depressed? Ah, it's simply time for a good, cleansing leeching. Yes, leeches. Or, if you were fortunate enough to reside in a slightly more progressive household, you might endure cupping, extensive bloodletting, or a searing hot poultice applied directly to your abdomen. Physicians of the era truly believed the human body required a delicate balance of humors, and for women, this often translated into draining them, literally, until their rebellious souls quieted down, or at the very least, until they mercifully fainted and ceased talking altogether. And the remedies, if one could call them that, did not end with physical interventions. There were also soothing rituals that verged on punitive, such as being confined to a dark, isolated room for days on end, or, perhaps most tellingly, being sternly advised not to read, because a woman with too many books, it was implicitly understood, might dangerously begin to think. And thinking, of course, was notoriously hazardous to the delicate stability of one's womb. In elite households, women suffering from various nervous complaints might be dispatched to the tranquil countryside for rest, a proposition that sounded idyllic on paper but often entailed being constantly watched, rigorously silenced, and dosed with potent herbal tonics until they managed to produce a convincing smile again, or at least a passable imitation. The Renaissance, in its grandeur, adored beauty. It celebrated exquisite harmony and perfect proportion. But it was utterly at a loss for what to do with a woman who wept uncontrollably, whose sobs pierced the quiet of the night, or who simply could not find sleep. Emotional pain, especially when it manifested in women, was perceived as unruly, fundamentally unbalanced, and above all, deeply inconvenient. So, it was muted, draped in layers of silk and propriety, firmly locked behind the ornate doors of private chambers, or blithely dismissed as mere womanly trouble. And in the magnificent grand halls where timeless paintings were painstakingly brought to life and sublime symphonies were meticulously composed, women grappling with anxiety walked silently, their heads often bowed, forever wondering if, perhaps, the profound problem truly resided within them. Not the world pressing down, not the suffocating societal pressures, not the crushing weight of grief, but just them. Because, even in the dawn of enlightenment, a woman's fear was still considered a fundamental flaw to be painstakingly hidden, not a gaping wound to be compassionately heard. As we transition into the burgeoning dynamism of the 17th and 18th centuries, the world is quite literally abuzz with an unprecedented surge of progress. Telescopes are peering with newfound clarity into the vast, star-studded heavens. Eminent philosophers are profoundly pondering radical concepts of liberty and reason, reshaping the very fabric of human thought. And Isaac Newton, with his groundbreaking theories, is finally explaining gravity, at last providing humanity with a more scientifically sound excuse for occasionally falling apart. Yet, if you happen to be a woman during this age of enlightenment, struggling silently with the insidious grip of anxiety, all that dazzling rationality, all that intellectual fervor offered you precious little solace. Because while the masculine world was rapidly unearthing natural laws and championing human rights, your trembling hands and your agonizingly sleepless nights were still being summarily filed away under the dismissive, catch-all category of female problems. Medical men, now sporting elaborate powdered wigs and cultivating an air of utmost seriousness, were indeed beginning to pen treatises on the intricate workings of the nervous system. They even coined a seemingly polite, almost elegant, term for women like you, nervous ladies. But beneath that veneer of genteel politeness, behind the seemingly innocuous label, resided the same ancient, deeply entrenched belief Women were inherently emotionally delicate, spiritually frail, and biologically engineered for periodic breakdowns. The uterus, thankfully, had by this point largely ceased its fantastical wandering. But now, these esteemed doctors gravely declared that women possessed too many nerves, or were subject to too much stimulation, or, perhaps most damningly, suffered from too much imagination. In short, the Enlightenment, for all its vaunted reason, concluded that women were simply too much. If you found yourself crying often, or becoming easily overwhelmed, or suffering from recurrent panic attacks, you might be prescribed a regimen of enforced rest, warm, calming baths, gentle, supervised walks, or everyone's unfortunate favorite, laudanum. A seemingly innocuous, yet profoundly insidious, little cocktail composed primarily of alcohol and opium. Laudanum, in its narcotic embrace, could indeed quiet your anxieties, numb your pain, and quite possibly, dangerously suppress your pulse. But at least, the prevailing wisdom went, you weren't complaining anymore. For wealthier women, there existed the dubious luxury of nervous retreats, tranquil country estates where you would be meticulously waited on by servants while being gently, yet firmly, discouraged from reading, from thinking, or from discussing anything remotely upsetting, especially the inconvenient subject of your own tumultuous emotions. Poorer women, of course, were afforded no such luxury of sedation. They simply endured, their struggles invisible, unacknowledged. And if you dared to express anger or frustration, or, heaven forbid, ambition, you might be deemed not merely anxious, but dangerously unstable, perhaps even outright mad. Your husband, with a mere signature, possessed the terrifying legal authority to have you confined, without trial, without explanation, plunging you into an enforced, suffocating silence. This, then, was the Enlightenment. Reason for men, sedation for women, public discourse for philosophers, private despair for housewives, logic that built grand libraries, fear that locked heavy doors. So, as the world basked in the dazzling light of scientific discovery, women grappling with anxiety sat quietly in the deepening shadows, medicated, misunderstood, and repeatedly told that their profound pain was nothing more than a passing flutter of nerves. Nothing, absolutely nothing, to worry about. Just breathe. And whatever you do, don't think too hard. Now, we drift, almost imperceptibly, into the 19th century, the indelible Victorian age. On the polished surface, everything appears impeccably elegant. Corsets are cinched to an almost suffocating tightness. Manners are tighter still, and any genuine emotional expression, particularly from women, is considered nothing short of downright indecent. Anxiety, however, has not vanished. It has merely been meticulously rebranded. Welcome, then, to the chilling age of the rest cure. This notorious treatment was pioneered by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, a man whose formidable mustache was perhaps more distinguished than his questionable empathy. The rest cure was prescribed with alarming frequency to women suffering from what was still broadly and vaguely labeled as nervous disorders. You felt anxious, profoundly exhausted, undeniably depressed. The solution, according to Dr. Mitchell, you were to lie in bed, rigidly confined, for weeks, sometimes even for agonizing months. No reading, absolutely no writing, no visitors allowed, and most critically, no talking about your inconvenient feelings. Just a plush, opulent room, heavy, light-blocking curtains, a monotonous diet of boiled milk, and the slow, insidious, creeping sensation that you might, just might, be inexorably losing your mind, which, ironically, was often precisely what happened, thanks to the treatment. Women were expected to surrender entirely to this enforced stillness, to melt into an alarming state of absolute passivity. Any movement was considered a form of rebellion. Any thought, especially an independent one, was deemed dangerous. If you dared to resist this enforced inertia, you were accused of resisting healing, a convenient justification for even more stringent confinement. This was not some obscure, fringe treatment. It was widely respected, even celebrated, within the medical establishment. The famous American writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman herself endured the harrowing experience of the rest cure, and later, through her visceral suffering, penned The Yellow Wallpaper, a chilling, seminal story about a woman systematically driven mad by her forced silence and isolation. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the wallpaper, with its maddening pattern, that ultimately broke her spirit. It was the gilded cage of polite, padded neglect. And then, beyond the confines of these private rooms, there were the asylums. If your anxiety stubbornly refused to yield to boiled milk and mandatory napping, you might soon find yourself behind the imposing, cold stone walls of a sanatorium. Once institutionalized, women were subjected to a litany of often brutal therapies, ice baths, electrotherapy, in its nascent, crude forms, and endless, dehumanizing observation. Some were administered heavy doses of morphine, while others were physically restrained for days at a time, their limbs bound to beds. Their crime: crying too much, talking too fast, or, most tellingly, simply refusing to smile. And still, no one genuinely asked why. No one asked if she had suffered the unbearable loss of a child, or endured unspeakable violence, or simply buckled under the impossible weight of Victorian perfection. In the Victorian world, women were meant to be serene, perfectly composed, ethereal, almost angelic. And if they deviated from this impossible ideal, they were hidden away, beautifully, quietly, tragically, because society, in its rigid structure, was never truly built to treat anxious women. It was built, instead, to prevent them from ever disrupting the delicate civility of the dinner table. Welcome to the early 1900s, an era when corsets were gradually loosening their suffocating grip. The industrial age was humming with newfound energy, and a rather peculiar man named Sigmund Freud had taken up the controversial hobby of blaming almost everything on your childhood or, more specifically, your father. Freud, the undisputed father of psychoanalysis, offered what, at the time, was a truly revolutionary idea. Perhaps women weren't suffering from malevolent demons or biologically defective wombs. Perhaps the root of their torment lay within their own minds, their unconscious desires, their deeply repressed emotions, their unresolved conflicts and issues. Now, this should have been a monumental turning point, a profound moment of progress, and in many ways, it was. Instead of cruelly dunking anxious women in frigid water or pacifying them with mind-numbing opium, doctors now invited them to recline on a comfortable couch and, simply, talk. Revolutionary, indeed. But before we prematurely uncork the champagne, let us scrutinize how they were expected to talk, and, more importantly, how they were interpreted. Freud and his zealous followers often viewed anxiety in women as the direct consequence of repressed sexual desire or deeply internalized guilt, usually and conveniently directed at their parents. If you were anxious, the prevailing Freudian wisdom suggested it was likely because you were subconsciously suppressing something scandalous, something forbidden. You just hadn't unearthed it yet. Were you afraid to leave the safety of your home? Clearly symbolic, a manifestation of deeper, unconscious fears. Having recurring, unsettling nightmares? Probably a metaphor for your mother, or perhaps your own unfulfilled desires. Panic attacks? Definitely something inherently Freudian, most likely phallic in its hidden meaning. And while this new method of treatment was undeniably less physically violent than its predecessors, it still arrived burdened with its own insidious, subtle form of blame. The problem, it relentlessly insisted, was unequivocally inside you, not in your suffocating circumstances, not in the unaddressed trauma that haunted your past, not in the stifling, impossible expectations placed squarely upon your shoulders by a patriarchal society. You simply needed to unpack it all, and if, after countless sessions, you didn't experience improvement, the insidious implication was that perhaps you weren't trying hard enough. Perhaps you were actively resisting the uncomfortable truth of your own unconscious. Psychoanalysis, with its air of intellectual sophistication and mysterious depth, spread like wildfire among the intellectual elite. In smoky Viennese rooms, doctors diligently scribbled notes while women, often hesitant, often vulnerable, whispered about their most intimate dreams and their most profound fears, still desperately trying to be taken seriously, still yearning, above all, to be heard. It was progress, yes, but a fragile, precarious kind of progress. Because even though the literal cages of asylums had been exchanged for the velvet comfort of analytic couches, women's anxiety was still being relentlessly interpreted through an overwhelmingly male lens, often reductively distilled to libido, to unfulfilled longing, or to persistent daddy issues. And so, the fundamental question remained, hauntingly persistent. Could a woman ever simply be anxious without being perceived, fundamentally, as broken? Or would every tremor, every heartfelt tear, every silent, suffocated scream be meticulously pinned to a theoretical construct instead of acknowledged as a raw, undeniable truth? It's the 1950s now. The war is a fading memory. The meticulously trimmed lawn is a symbol of suburban prosperity, and your casserole, by unspoken decree, is expected to grace the dinner table by precisely 6 o'clock. You are a woman in idyllic suburbia, impeccably polished nails, a radiant, unwavering smile, a strand of luminous pearls adorning your neck. And your anxiety? Well, darling, that's simply not something we discuss. Because, according to the glossy magazines that trumpet domestic bliss and the soothing pronouncements of daytime radio, everything in this perfect world is unequivocally fine. So why, then, do you feel an overwhelming, primal urge to scream? Enter Mother's Little Helper, the saccharine nickname for a small, unassuming pill imbued with a monumental promise, absolute calmness. Specifically, Valium and its slightly older, equally insidious cousin, Miltown. These tiny sedatives were marketed with astonishing precision and disturbing zeal directly to women, particularly housewives, who felt profoundly overwhelmed, perpetually underappreciated, or were quietly, secretly unraveling in a sea of perfectly matching Tupperware. Feeling sad, inexplicably anxious, numb to the bone? Just pop a pill, dear, and remember to smile for the ever-watchful neighbors. Doctors, often with a paternalistic flourish, handed them out like candy. No one bothered to ask about the possibility of underlying trauma. No one genuinely inquired about the gnawing loneliness that permeated these isolated suburban lives. No one even wondered if spending every single day vacuuming in heels while meticulously pretending that everything was perfect might, just might, be slowly crushing a woman's spirit. Because in this meticulously constructed new world of conformity and burgeoning consumerism, a woman's primary role was to be utterly, cheerfully content. And if she wasn't, if that perfect smile faltered, then clearly something was fundamentally wrong with her. Not the stifling role, not the impossible expectations, not the endless, suffocating isolation. Pharmaceutical companies, with a disturbing, almost predatory enthusiasm, leaned heavily into this pervasive narrative. One particularly jarring advertisement for tranquilizers featured a woman gripping a kitchen sink with desperate intensity, emblazoned with the caption, "You can't set her free, but you can help her feel less trapped." Another proudly promised peace of mind for overburdened housewives. You know, the ones valiantly holding the entire family together with a forced smile and a steadily increasing dose of benzodiazepines. By the 1960s, millions of women were routinely medicated, not because they were genuinely mentally ill, but because they were profoundly exhausted, because they were deeply sad and didn't comprehend why, because they were human beings trapped in a culture that adamantly refused to allow them to be. And while these potent drugs offered a seductive promise of short-term relief, they very often came with the devastating, unspoken cost of long-term dependency. But no one, of course, ever discussed that. Addiction, after all, was considered profoundly unladylike. So they smiled. They swallowed. And somewhere, deep beneath the numbing blanket of sedation, the real, terrifying question quietly lingered. What if her anxiety wasn't a disorder to be medicated into silence? What if it was, instead, a warning? A silent, desperate scream emanating from a soul that was never, truly, allowed to speak its truth? By the vibrant, turbulent 1970s, something fundamental had finally shifted. The ubiquitous casserole was still warm on the kitchen counter. The house was still meticulously tidy. But now, the woman inside it had begun to articulate profound questions, questions that reverberated with a newfound urgency. Why am I the only one consistently sedated? Why does my very real pain come with a ubiquitous prescription, but never a genuine conversation? And who, precisely, decided that my anxiety was something I should perpetually apologize for? The feminist movement, by this point, was swelling, not necessarily with an unbridled rage, but with an exhilarating, collective clarity. Women were beginning to talk, openly and honestly, in consciousness-raising groups that sprang up spontaneously across living rooms and university campuses nationwide. They compared notes, shared their deepest vulnerabilities, and what they collectively discovered was profoundly liberating. They were emphatically not alone. Anxiety, they realized, wasn't some inexplicable personal flaw. It wasn't merely hormones or a resurgence of ancient hysteria. It was, often, the entirely logical and rational result of being relentlessly overworked, systematically unheard, and perpetually expected to perform an exhausting, invisible emotional labor, as if it were simply another piece of the household furniture. Seminal books like The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan courageously cracked open the polished, pristine surface of post-war domesticity, bravely revealing the problem that has no name. It gave voice to countless women who felt an inexplicable emptiness, a gnawing anxiety, a restless discontent, despite outwardly possessing everything society had relentlessly told them they should want. Finally, someone, with astonishing clarity, articulated the unspoken truth. It's not in your head. It's in the walls, the suffocating expectations, the deafening silence. And once that profound silence was irrevocably broken, there was, gloriously, no going back. Women began the arduous, yet exhilarating, process of reclaiming their own stories. They stopped passively accepting tranquilizers as hollow apologies for their pain. They began, collectively, to question the very institutions that had pathologized their fundamental emotions for centuries. In therapy rooms across the nation, a new kind of counselor was quietly, yet powerfully, emerging. One who actually listened. One who didn't automatically assume that every panic attack was a desperate, subconscious cry for marriage or motherhood. Crucially, women began to enter the fields of psychology, medicine, and psychiatry, not merely as vulnerable patients, but as formidable professionals, bringing their unique perspectives and empathy to a system that desperately needed it. It wasn't a perfect, immediate transformation, of course. Misdiagnosis was still regrettably common. Bias, deeply ingrained, still stubbornly lingered. And pharmaceutical companies were, it must be said, still very, very busy. But something undeniably important, something fundamentally paradigm-shifting, had changed forever. Women were talking, truly talking, and this time, they weren't being interrupted, dismissed, or silenced. They were meticulously connecting the profound dots between their deeply personal pain and the pervasive societal pressures that had shaped their lives, between their intense internal struggles and the rigid, often oppressive, external structures of their world. They were, bravely, rewriting the entire narrative, from the self-blaming question of what's wrong with me, to the far more empathetic and insightful inquiry of what happened to me. And slowly, often painfully, the world itself began its glacial, yet inevitable, shift. Because when women finally stopped whispering and began, instead, to compare notes, they discovered something truly revolutionary. That their anxiety wasn't madness. It was truth. A raw, undeniable truth, desperately trying to find a voice in a world that had never, truly, wanted to hear it. As the vibrant, often chaotic, decades of the 1980s and 90s rolled in, Women's anxiety, after centuries of dismissal and mislabeling, finally began to acquire a proper, medically recognized name. No longer was it vaguely referred to as hysteria, or the nerves, or the infuriatingly dismissive, she's just tired. Instead, actual, precise diagnostic terms emerged from the evolving field of psychiatry: generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. Finally, a legitimate medical vocabulary that, for the first time in recorded history, didn't automatically blame the uterus. Progress, right? Well, sort of. Psychiatry was indeed becoming more precise, more rigorous in its classifications. The DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the authoritative, thick diagnostic manual brimming with all the recognized mental health labels, was growing ever thicker with new distinctions. And crucially, insurance companies were, for the first time, beginning to reimburse treatments for these newly categorized conditions. But even as the science itself evolved, the lived experience of being a woman grappling with anxiety still came burdened with familiar, unsettling echoes of doubt, of casual dismissal, and of persistent, pervasive stigma. Let's imagine, for a moment, you were a woman in 1993, experiencing the terrifying onset of panic attacks. You bravely go to a doctor, your heart pounding like a drum against your ribs, your palms clammy with sweat, utterly convinced, in that moment, that you are dying. He might, with a sympathetic but detached air, hand you a generic pamphlet, a quick prescription for Xanax, and a polite, almost breezy, suggestion to simply get some rest. At least, you might think, they'd stopped blaming your uterus. Now, instead, they were subtly blaming your lifestyle. You're clearly working too hard, he might say. You're probably just overwhelmed. Have you, perhaps, tried jogging? And sure, therapy was now a tangible, more widely accepted option, if you could afford the often prohibitive cost. But finding a therapist who wouldn't implicitly assume your anxiety was merely being emotional or overly sensitive could still prove to be a significant, frustrating challenge. If you wept openly during a session, you might be internally labeled as fragile. If you stoically held back your tears, you might be deemed to be in denial. Either way, your diagnosis, it often felt, came with an unspoken asterisk, a subtle caveat. Still, for many women, finally having a concrete, recognized name for the indescribable turmoil they felt was akin to being handed a luminous mirror after years spent stumbling in the dark. It wasn't a sign of weakness. It wasn't evidence of personal failure. It was real, and it had, devastatingly, been there all along. Medications, too, saw significant improvements. SSRIs, groundbreaking drugs like Prozac and Zoloft, became household names, widely marketed as modern solutions to modern struggles. And for countless individuals, they truly, undeniably helped alleviate suffering. But again, they often arrived without a comprehensive explanation. No one was digging deeper into the profound impact of past trauma, or the intricate web of personal history, or the insidious patterns of generational suffering. Just take this, feel better. So yes, progress was undeniably made, but it was often clinical, detached, rather than deeply compassionate. It was structured, rigid, rather than truly sensitive. The labels were new, but the gnawing loneliness that often accompanied anxiety was still painfully familiar. Because even with new names and prescribed pills and reassuring pamphlets, the fundamental question still lingered, quietly, persistently, in the hushed moments of solitude. Will someone, anyone, ever truly ask why I am afraid? Welcome to the vibrant, technologically evolving landscape of the 2000s, an era where flip phones were, for a brief, bewildering time, considered cool, low-rise jeans were confusingly ubiquitous, and for the first time in centuries, people began asking not just, what's wrong with you? But, with a profound shift in perspective, what happened to you? It was a quiet revolution, not heralded by dramatic banners or widespread public protests, but rather articulated through the accessible insights of TED Talks, the raw honesty of memoirs, and a slow, yet inexorable, transformation in clinical conversations. Researchers, empathetic therapists, and courageous trauma survivors began meticulously connecting the profound dots that had been stubbornly ignored for far too long. Anxiety, they revealed, wasn't merely a random chemical imbalance within the brain or a peculiar, inexplicable quirk of personality. Sometimes, most profoundly, it was an entirely normal, rational, and understandable response to a life that simply hadn't been very kind. And suddenly, three pivotal words entered the collective spotlight, words that would forever change the landscape of mental health care: trauma-informed care. Instead of treating anxiety like an individual defect, a flaw inherent to one's being, this burgeoning approach asked profoundly bigger questions. It delved into the very architecture of the self, asking, what experiences, overt or subtle, have profoundly shaped your nervous system, wiring it for heightened alert? What deep-seated, often unconscious, patterns is your body desperately trying to survive, even when there's no immediate threat? What if your hypervigilance, that constant scanning for danger, isn't irrational at all, but a meticulously learned response to past circumstances? This wasn't merely an academic shift. It was a deeply personal, often cathartic revelation, particularly for women. Suddenly, anxiety could be traced back to the silent, unacknowledged traumas that had long festered beneath the surface of polite conversation. The insidious currents of abuse and neglect, the crushing weight of generational pressure to embody impossible ideals, the corrosive impact of workplace harassment, the silent, emotional burden of performing perfection while quietly disintegrating inside. For many, this reframing brought an immense wave of relief, a profound sense of validation. For the first time, their persistent fear wasn't a personal failing, a character flaw to be overcome with sheer willpower. It was a wound, deep and often unseen, but a wound nonetheless. And crucially, wounds, unlike defects, can heal. Yet, this wasn't a magical, instantaneous fix that reset the world. Society, in its relentless pursuit of progress and profit, still clung to productivity with a fiercer grip than it did to genuine peace. Women continued to face an unrelenting barrage of expectations, to remain calm, capable, and impeccably composed, even while skillfully juggling demanding households, accelerating careers, the intricate needs of children, and an ever-growing stack of newly minted mental health buzzwords. Burnout, imposter syndrome, high-functioning anxiety. These were all terms that sounded contemporary, born of a new era, but often felt like the repackaged echoes of centuries-old struggles. And while therapy, thankfully, was becoming more accessible, its landscape remained uneven, often prohibitively expensive and frustratingly inconsistent. One therapist might possess the rare gift of truly holding sacred space, offering empathy without judgment. Another might dispense unsolicited advice with a dismissive wave and an awkward, unhelpful smile. Social media, a double-edged sword, both helped and harmed. Women could now bravely share their struggles publicly, forging powerful bonds of solidarity across time zones and continents. Yet, they could also be met with simplistic platitudes, urged to drink more water and meditate, instead of truly addressing years of deeply embedded systemic trauma. Still, a tectonic plate beneath the surface was shifting. The world, slowly, haltingly, was finally beginning to understand what women, in their bones and hearts, had always known: that anxiety wasn't a fundamental weakness. It was history itself, whispering through the body, a silent plea waiting for someone, anyone, to truly listen. Now, we arrive fully in the age of omnipresent Wi-Fi, the meticulously curated feeds of wellness influencers, and phones that, like digital overlords, never truly let you rest. Welcome, indeed, to the digital era, a place where women's anxiety often no longer requires a doctor's diagnosis to manifest. It simply needs a screen. You wake up, perhaps, to a symphony of 37 notifications, for new emails demanding immediate attention, 2 insistent calendar alerts, and a message from someone who just wants to pick your brain. You haven't even had your first sip of coffee, but your pulse is already sprinting, a frantic drummer against your ribs. Anxiety in this digital age isn't merely an internal state. It's an interactive, all-consuming, and utterly constant experience. You are perpetually expected to be available, responsive, relentlessly successful, perfectly hydrated, emotionally balanced, and, preferably, always glowing. All of this, while maintaining a perfectly curated smile on a platform that ironically labels itself social. The modern woman isn't just managing her life, she's meticulously managing her personal brand. And somehow, in this strange new world, anxiety is simultaneously a dire red flag, a warning of impending collapse, and a performative aesthetic. Suddenly, posts declaring "my anxiety is bad today" can trend, as long as they're artfully paired with the right soft focus filter and a caption that's just self-aware enough, but never too messy or inconveniently raw. Vulnerability, it seems, sells, but only if it's perfectly packaged and easily digestible. And if you dare to try and unplug, to step away from the relentless current, good luck. The world doesn't slow down for you. The algorithm, a digital gatekeeper, punishes your absence. Emails, like unchecked tasks, pile up in your inbox, each one a fresh pang of guilt. Even the ancient, contemplative practice of meditation has been commodified, transformed into a form of performance art, meticulously tracked by an app and graded by your smartwatch. Anxiety, it seems, is everywhere, but so is a never-ending stream of contradictory advice. You can scroll endlessly through short-form reels promising to cure your nervous system in under 30 seconds. Breathwork, matcha lattes, guided journaling, tapping techniques, all potentially great tools in their own right, until they become just another series of checkboxes, added to an already overwhelmingly overfilled day. And through it all, beneath the shimmering, constantly evolving surface of modern life, the root of women's anxiety remains surprisingly, stubbornly consistent: pressure. The omnipresent, suffocating pressure to be liked by everyone, to be effortlessly successful in every endeavor, to be perpetually informed and instantly responsive, to be perfectly healthy and impossibly thin, to be ethically flawless, endlessly kind, ruthlessly efficient, creatively brilliant, and hilariously funny, but never, ever too funny, or it might be perceived as unprofessional. And in the midst of this dizzying performance, don't forget to reply immediately to your boss, your best friend, and that relentlessly active mom group chat that somehow never sleeps. It's little wonder your chest feels a constant, visceral tightness. Because in this age of being on 24/7, true rest feels not just elusive, but radical, almost subversive. Silence, once a solace, now feels suspicious, a void that must be filled. And peace, that elusive state of tranquility, feels like a full-time job on its own, an endeavor requiring more effort than most careers. But here, then, is the quiet, often overlooked truth. Your anxiety isn't a glitch in your system. It's not a malfunction. It's a signal, a clear, insistent message that your finely tuned nervous system was simply not designed for this much sustained noise, this relentless barrage of input and expectation. After centuries of being silenced, of being sedated into submission, of being shamed for their emotions, and now, scrolled into a state of sheer exhaustion, something unexpected, yet profoundly powerful, is beginning to happen. Women are slowing down, not because the world has, with sudden grace, eased its suffocating grip. It hasn't, not truly. But because many are awakening to the stark realization that perpetually racing to meet impossible, ever-shifting standards only leads to one inevitable destination: a desolate landscape of burnout, invariably served with a generous side of existential dread. So now, in quiet corners of the internet where true connection blossoms, in hushed living rooms filled with shared understanding, in sun-drenched yoga studios, and within the protective embrace of therapy circles, a soft revolution is quietly underway. It is not loud. It doesn't scream for attention or strive to go viral. It doesn't wear perfectly matching athleisure or religiously quote the latest productivity gurus. It just rests. Rest as a profound act of resistance against a culture that demands constant output. Rest as an essential act of reclaiming one's body, one's mind, one's very soul. Rest as the long-forbidden medicine, the potent elixir women were systematically denied for centuries. Not the forced, punitive kind prescribed by dismissive Victorian doctors, designed to keep women pliable and powerless, but the chosen kind. The sacred kind that whispers, then asserts, "I don't owe anyone my exhaustion." Women are courageously learning to say no, not perceiving it as a failure of spirit or duty, but as a firm, necessary boundary. They are canceling plans that drain their energy, logging off from the digital demands, and defiantly, radically, letting the dishes sit in the sink, unwashed, for another hour, or even another day. And shockingly, beautifully, the world, in its vast, indifferent complexity, somehow keeps spinning. It's not easy, not by any stretch. The insidious hum of guilt is still there, a persistent whisper in the back of the mind. You should be doing more. You're falling behind. But now, mercifully, there's another voice rising beside it, a quieter, yet infinitely more powerful one. A voice that says, with gentle authority, "You've done enough for today. Breathe." Communities are organically forming around this shared, liberating truth. Groups of women gathering, virtually and in person, who hold sacred space for each other without an ounce of judgment. Who say, with heartfelt recognition, "Me too," instead of the soul-crushing, dismissive refrain of, "Why can't you just push through?" They are, slowly, bravely, rewriting the narrative of womanhood, one conscious exhale at a time. They are learning, together, that healing is not a linear path, but a meandering, often messy journey. That some days, you'll manage to meditate and journal and go for a refreshing walk, embodying the picture of wellness. Other days, you'll find yourself crying into your cereal, deleting your entire calendar with a desperate swipe, unable to face the demands. And both, they are realizing, are perfectly okay. And maybe, just maybe, anxiety doesn't mean you're inherently broken, a defective part in need of repair. Maybe it means you're profoundly awake, exquisitely sensitive, in a world that tries so relentlessly hard to numb you into submission. So tonight, if your mind is racing, a frantic hamster on a wheel, or your heart feels heavy, burdened by the day's weight, remember this fundamental truth. You are not a machine. You were never meant to be. And in a culture that worships hustle and relentlessly celebrates productivity above all else, choosing to rest, to truly, deeply rest, is not a weakness. It is wisdom, ancient, sacred, and profoundly revolutionary. Long before the era of carefully curated selfies, the fleeting fashion of sailor sleeves, or even the regrettable ubiquity of lower back tattoos, people were getting tattooed. In fact, the earliest known tattoos didn't belong to rebellious teenagers seeking to defy convention or to battle-hardened warriors marking their conquests. They belonged to a man frozen in time, quite literally. Ötzi the Iceman, discovered high in the Ötztal Alps in 1991, is over 5,000 years old. His body, miraculously preserved by the relentless embrace of snow, the passage of millennia, and a stroke of incredible luck, is etched with 61 distinct tattoos, crafted from simple black lines and crosses. Not fierce skulls, not elaborate dragons, just lines. But here's the profound thing. These lines weren't random, haphazard markings. They were strategically placed on his joints, along his spine, and around his ankles, areas known for chronic pain. Modern researchers now widely believe these ancient markings may have been a rudimentary form of early acupuncture or a sophisticated method of pain relief. It was an ancient, intuitive blend of medicine and ritual, meticulously etched into the skin with soot and sharpened tools. Primitive, yes, by today's standards, but undeniably intentional and deeply purposeful. These weren't tattoos for show, they were tattoos for survival. Ötzi wasn't alone in his inked existence. Across the vast stretches of ancient Egypt, tattooed mummies, predominantly women, have been discovered adorned with intricate patterns and geometric designs across their bodies. Some archaeologists theorize these were powerful symbols of fertility, intended to protect both mother and child during the perilous act of childbirth. Others believe they were sacred signs of devotion to the goddess Hathor, a deity associated with motherhood, joy, and feminine love. Either way, these weren't merely ornamental flourishes. They were spiritual safeguards, protective talismans, worn proudly and intended to carry their wearers safely into the next life. In the frozen expanses of Siberia, tattooed Scythian nobles were interred in icy tombs, their remarkably preserved bodies intricately decorated with magnificent mythical animals, powerful deer, sleek panthers, and fierce griffins curling dynamically across their arms and torsos in bold, black ink. For these nomadic warrior peoples, tattoos were far more than decoration. They were a warrior's mark of prowess, a vital passport into the afterlife, and often a clear sign of elevated rank or status within their tribe. These weren't necessarily the first humans to tattoo themselves. They were simply the first we've had the astonishing fortune to find. And that, in essence, is the quiet truth of tattoo history. It didn't begin with fleeting trends or pop culture fads. It began with profound ritual, with the endurance of pain, and with sacred intention. Tattoos were never just about superficial beauty. They were potent medicine, indelible memory, and vital protection. Long before ink became a symbol of rebellion, it was an expression of reverence, a sacred thread of human experience that wound its way through the very fabric of the skin. It was a way to tell stories when there were no books, to mark meaning before humanity even had names for such profound concepts. So the next time you see a simple line of ink, remember, someone did that thousands of years ago, using fire and ash, and to them, it meant everything. To truly understand the soulful essence of tattooing, we must drift across the vast, cerulean expanse of the Pacific Ocean to the breathtaking islands of Polynesia, where ink was not a fleeting fashion statement, but a profound and sacred ceremony. In places like Samoa, Tonga, and Tahiti, tattoos were never chosen on a whim or a passing fancy. They were sacred, meticulously earned through arduous rites, and carried with immense pride for an entire lifetime. The very word tattoo itself comes from the Polynesian word tataw, meaning to strike, a direct reference to the rhythmic, percussive sound made by the tapping of ink into skin with expertly carved bone tools. This wasn't a mechanical process. This was a resonant, deeply spiritual rhythm. Tataw was far more than mere body art. It was a revered rite of passage, often excruciatingly painful, and always profoundly meaningful. A young Samoan man would lie stoically on a woven mat as the tattooist, or tafuga, a master of their craft, worked for days, sometimes even weeks, meticulously tapping intricate geometric patterns into his body with sharpened bone and pigment derived from soot. The design would stretch majestically from the waist to the knees, a breathtaking symbol of adulthood, tribal identity, and unwavering bravery. The pain endured during this process wasn't an incidental byproduct. It was an integral, essential part of the ritual. To endure it was to prove, beyond doubt, your readiness for the responsibilities of manhood. To back out mid-process brought not only personal shame, but a deep dishonor to your entire family and community. In Tahiti, tattoos were living narratives, telling tales of genealogy and social status. They might reflect divine protection, a profound spiritual connection to the gods, or a woman's readiness for sexual maturity and marriage. A woman's fingers might be delicately inked to signal her eligibility for marriage. A man's chest might boldly proclaim his warrior lineage and the heroic deeds of his ancestors. Every dot, every line, every curve held sacred meaning, connecting the individual to their past, present, and future. Even today, in many Polynesian communities, tattoos retain this incredibly powerful, foundational role. They are not merely expressions of individual selfhood. They are vibrant, tangible connections to ancestry, living records carried on the skin, a perpetually unfolding scroll of identity and heritage. When European explorers, led by figures like Captain James Cook, first arrived in the Pacific during the 18th century, they were simultaneously fascinated and utterly horrified by the sight of these elaborately tattooed peoples. Sailors like Cook meticulously recorded the practice in their journals, detailing the intricate artistry and the stoicism of the tattooed islanders. Soon after, members of Cook's own crew began adopting tattoos themselves, not to honor the sacred ritual or embrace its profound cultural meaning, but rather to mark their travels, an exotic souvenir, a fleeting trend, stripped entirely of its original spiritual significance, but inked all the same. Yet, the profound origin remained. Polynesian tattooing was never meant to be casual or superficial. It was sacred, deeply personal, and carried with an ancestral pride through countless generations, enduring proof that your story was worthy of pain and permanent enough to live forever just beneath the surface of the skin. As we shift our gaze eastward, the story of tattooing takes on a more complicated, often contradictory shape, one interwoven with threads of beauty and punishment, profound honor and searing shame, all meticulously inked into flesh. In ancient China, tattoos carried a heavy, almost unbearable stigma. Rather than being symbols of spirituality or strength, they were more often marks of indelible disgrace. Criminals were routinely tattooed on the face or neck with damning words like thief or traitor, permanent, visible reminders to society of what that person had done and, perhaps more tragically, who they would forever be in the eyes of others. It was a practice brutally known as chipe, branding for exile. Your punishment didn't simply end with your sentence. It stayed on your skin, a burning scarlet letter, for the entirety of your life. And yet, even here, in the deep shadows of shame and ostracization, tattooing held unexpected, deeper layers. Some Chinese warriors, often revered figures, voluntarily wore ink to show fierce loyalty to their brothers in arms or unwavering devotion to a noble cause. In the legendary novel Water Margin, one of the 108 heroic outlaws is famously said to have his entire body tattooed with powerful imagery of dragons, tigers, and swirling flames, a man's honor written upon his very skin like sacred scripture. In Japan, the story of tattooing is just as layered, perhaps even more so, a complex tapestry woven with threads of tradition and defiance. Early Japanese tattoos, known as iriyumi, were used for benevolent purposes, to ward off malevolent evil spirits, to protect intrepid fishermen on treacherous seas, or even to symbolize status within a community. But, much like in China, tattoos also became formidable tools of punishment. Criminals were marked with stark lines on their arms or distinct symbols on their foreheads. In some regions, each subsequent crime added another stroke, a visible, escalating tally of dishonor that was impossible for anyone to ignore. But over time, something profound changed. By the Edo period, spanning from the 1600s to the 1800s, full-body tattoos began to emerge as a vibrant, clandestine underground art form. Elaborate, exquisitely detailed designs, powerful dragons, graceful koi fish, revered gods, terrifying demons, began to stretch across the backs, arms, and legs of commoners. These weren't criminals or outcasts in the traditional sense. These were brave firemen, hardworking laborers, and daring gamblers, men with dangerous professions and, often, even more dangerous reputations. And then came the Yakuza, Japan's feared and enigmatic crime syndicates, who embraced full-body irezumi as the ultimate symbols of strength, loyalty, and chilling fearlessness. The more coverage an individual had, and the greater the pain they endured to acquire it, the more respect they commanded within the syndicate. These weren't tattoos meant for public display. They were private, hidden beneath perfectly tailored suits, revealed only in the sanctity of bathhouses or, more dramatically, in the crucible of battle. In both China and Japan, tattoos perpetually lived in a state of tension, revered art and brutal punishment, profound identity and forced exile, a constant, intricate dance between pride and shame. Because sometimes, the ink that marks you also, irrevocably, defines you. In ancient Europe, tattoos walked a razor-thin line between declarations of power and instruments of punishment, depending entirely on who held the needle and who bore the indelible mark. Let's begin with the Celts and the Picts, fierce tribal peoples who inhabited what is now Britain and Scotland. When Roman soldiers first encountered them, they were utterly stunned by what they beheld. These warriors, some bravely naked, others cloaked in the pelts of wolves, were covered in swirling, mesmerizing blue tattoos, fierce spirals, and intricate knots etched across their faces and bodies. The dye, derived from woad, a plant-based ink, stained the skin a deep, resonant blue, like thunderclouds permanently rolled across their flesh. These weren't mere decorations. They were battle armor, psychological intimidation, and an undeniable statement of tribal identity. To tattoo your body in such a manner was to declare, with every fiber of your being, I am not afraid to bleed. I am not afraid to fight. Julius Caesar himself described them in his writings, half in awe of their ferocity, half in horror at their perceived savagery, calling them wild and barbaric, a profound irony, considering what Rome did next. Because while the Romans prided themselves on their unparalleled law and order, their vast, organized empire, they also ruthlessly deployed tattoos not as symbols of honor, but as chilling tools of control and dehumanization. Criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war were systematically tattooed with brutal marks of ownership or searing shame. A runaway slave might be branded with the letters FEG, an abbreviation for fugitivus, fugitive. A soldier who deserted his legion would be inked forever with a mark of disgrace, a public, permanent stain on his honor. Even early Roman Christians, in the empire's nascent days, were sometimes tattooed to mark them as enemies of the state or, worse still, as dangerous heretics. These were not badges of pride. These were crushing burdens. And yet, not all Roman tattooing was punitive. Some soldiers, particularly those stationed in the eastern provinces, began to tattoo themselves voluntarily. These marks were often symbols of fierce loyalty to their legion or profound devotion to a particular deity, a quiet, often hidden rebellion, inked subtly beneath their armor, a personal declaration against the impersonal machinery of the empire. Over time, as Christianity gradually spread and gained immense power across the continent, tattooing in Europe fell further and further into disrepute. By the early Middle Ages, it was largely condemned as pagan, sinful, or utterly barbaric. The human body was now seen as a sacred temple, a vessel of God, and temples, apparently, were best left unpainted, unadorned by such profane markings. But deep in the ancient forests and along the misty, windswept moors, the old traditions stubbornly lived on, whispered through generations, passed down from mother to daughter, from warrior to warrior. Because long before ink became a criminal mark, it was profoundly tribal. And in the blood-soaked soils of ancient Europe, tattooing was the indelible proof that you belonged to your people, to your land, to your gods. As Europe entered the long, shadowed stretch of the Middle Ages, tattooing, once a vibrant cultural practice, faded from the public spotlight. But it never truly vanished. It simply went underground, becoming a clandestine art. The Christian Church, now a dominant, often dogmatic force across the continent, vehemently condemned tattooing. The body was to remain pure, unblemished, a pristine vessel of holiness awaiting spiritual ascension. Pagan customs, including the ancient practice of tattooing, were systematically swept aside, labeled as heathen, rebellious, or, in the chilling rhetoric of the time, demonic. And yet, even in this era of intense suppression, ink still found its way beneath the skin, stubbornly defying official decrees. Among Christian pilgrims, particularly those who embarked on the treacherous, often deadly journey to Jerusalem, tattoos became powerful symbols of unwavering devotion. A small cross, meticulously tattooed on the wrist or forearm, served as irrefutable proof, I made it. I survived. You had endured the perils of the seas, the scorching deserts, the attacks of bandits, and you came home marked, not by a journey, but by an unshakable faith. Some pilgrims even received these tattoos while in the Holy Land itself, etched into their skin by Coptic Christian families who had, for generations, fiercely preserved the sacred art of religious tattooing. These weren't decorative embellishments. They were spiritual contracts, profound reminders etched in flesh that proclaimed, "I belong to God, and I journeyed to his holy city." In some secluded monasteries, tattoos were quietly used to identify members of certain orders. Hidden symbols, discreet and deeply purposeful, known only to the initiated. There are whispers, though rarely confirmed by definitive historical record, of knights from the Crusades tattooing holy relics, saints, or sacred words onto their arms and chests before battle. The grim hope was that if they were to die far from home, in a foreign land, at least their body would bear the indelible mark of heaven, ensuring their spiritual salvation. Meanwhile, outside the imposing walls of the church, ancient folk traditions stubbornly endured. In remote villages in the depths of ancient forested regions, old customs lingered like mist. Women tattooed protective symbols on their hands during the perilous act of childbirth, invoking ancient blessings. Shepherds inked sacred patterns onto their skin to ward off predatory wolves, seeking divine protection for their flocks. These weren't fashion statements. They were potent prayers rendered in pigment. But still, to be tattooed in medieval Europe was to exist on the fringes of society, spiritually suspect and socially scrutinized. Unless, of course, you were branded by force. Criminals, prisoners, slaves, all could be marked against their will. And in those cases, the tattoo wasn't a choice. It was a visible, inescapable sentence. So the Middle Ages became a paradox, a time when ink was both forbidden and revered, sacred and shame-filled. A time when tattoos weren't loud declarations. They were whispers, whispers of enduring faith, of quiet defiance, and of the primal human need to leave an indelible mark, even when the world vehemently commanded you not to. As the majestic sails of European ships began slicing across vast, uncharted oceans in the 16th and 17th centuries, tattoos, in a fascinating twist of fate, returned to the Western world. Not through the channels of science or the dictates of religion, but through the rough, invigorating elements of salt water and the powerful sway of superstition. Explorers like the famed Captain James Cook didn't merely map coastlines and chart new territories. They encountered vibrant, ancient cultures, particularly in Polynesia, where tattooing was not just an art, but a sacred, integral part of life. Cook's sailors, captivated and often a little fearful by the bold patterns and the profound meanings embedded within these tattoos, began getting inked themselves. It was exotic, a touch dangerous, and inherently rebellious. All the things a sailor, living on the edge of the known world, craved. From there, tattooing spread through bustling port cities like spilled rum, quickly and widely. Sailors began crafting their own unique tattoo culture, a complex blend of survivalist practicality, maritime tradition, and robust bragging rights. A ship's anchor on the forearm meant you'd bravely crossed the Atlantic, enduring its storms and vastness. A turtle inked onto the skin signified you'd crossed the equator, officially earning the revered status of a shellback. A pig and a rooster tattooed on the feet, often on either ankle, served as a poignant charm to protect against drowning, because, oddly enough, those animals were often the only ones to miraculously survive shipwrecks, floating safely to shore in their wooden crates. Each tattoo carried a distinct meaning, though these meanings often shifted and evolved with the changing tides and the sailors' evolving experiences. An image of a dagger piercing a heart might symbolize a lost love left behind on shore, or simply recall a particularly rough night in a raucous Caribbean tavern. The words "hold fast" emblazoned across the knuckles was a prayer for grip, not on life itself, but on wet rigging in the howling winds of a stormy sea. Tattooing became an unofficial, universal language among sailors. No matter your national flag, your mother tongue, or your luck with rum-soaked dice, ink could tell your story, communicate your experiences, and signal your belonging. It was a shared identity, a silent testament, forged in the vast, isolating loneliness of the ocean. In bustling dockside towns like New York, London, and Lisbon, rudimentary tattoo parlors began to appear, small, smoky rooms filled with pots of ink, the sharp scent of alcohol, and tall tales from faraway lands. These weren't the meticulous artists of sacred Polynesian temples. They were often former sailors themselves, rough around the edges, frequently using homemade needles and crude gunpowder soot for pigment. But for men who routinely faced the terrifying specters of drowning, rampant disease, and the constant threat of mutiny, a little pain for a permanent memory didn't seem so bad. Tattoos became treasured keepsakes, silent confessions, living maps of the exotic places you'd been, and indelible markers of the parts of yourself you couldn't, or wouldn't, leave behind. In an era when most people's stories faded with time and word of mouth, sailors wrote theirs in ink, and let the vast, indifferent sea carry them, and their legends, into eternity. By the late 19th century, tattooing was no longer solely the clandestine mark of the sailor or the defiant outsider. Thanks to a pivotal spark, quite literally, from electricity, tattoos were powerfully stepping into the modern world. In 1891, Samuel O'Reilly, a New York-based tattooist, filed a groundbreaking patent for the first electric tattoo machine. Inspired by Thomas Edison's electric pen, O'Reilly's ingenious device allowed for significantly faster, far more precise work, and, crucially, with far less bleeding than the hand-tapping methods of old. Suddenly, complex tattoos that once took days of agonizing work could be completed in mere hours. Pain was still an undeniable part of the package, a necessary component of the ritual, but now the entire process felt less like a crude surgery and more like a refined art. And with this technological leap came a thrilling new era, the tattoo as performance. Circus sideshows and dime museums, those temples of the bizarre and extraordinary, began to feature elaborately tattooed men and women as tantalizing curiosities. There was Captain George Constantinos, the so-called tattooed Greek prince, whose entire body was a breathtaking canvas covered in intricate Eastern designs, an entire narrative etched onto his skin. And Nora Hildebrandt, one of America's first truly celebrated tattooed ladies, whose mesmerizing ink was matched only by the dramatic and highly fabricated tale of her supposed captivity and forced tattooing by a savage tribe. These performers weren't just oddities to be gawked at, they were living exhibitions, their bodies transformed into walking, breathing stories, challenging the rigid Victorian ideas of propriety and beauty, especially when a woman would, with a flourish, remove her sleeves and reveal a vibrant serpent curled menacingly around her shoulder. Yet, despite this public fascination, tattoos remained deeply taboo among respectable society. If you had visible ink, it carried a heavy implication. It meant something specific. You'd been to war, to sea, to jail, or you'd run away with the circus, aligning yourself with the fringes. And yet, behind the closed, velvet-draped doors of elite society, the privileged were quietly, discreetly getting tattooed too. It's widely rumored that both King Edward VII of England and his son, the future King George V, sported tattoos, one with a powerful Jerusalem cross, the other with an intricate dragon etched into his skin during a visit to Japan. Aristocrats across Europe and even some daring figures in American high society began to explore the novelty of body art, but always discreetly, privately, and with ample plausible deniability. Tattoo parlors, once confined mainly to rough-and-tumble port cities, now began appearing in burgeoning urban centers too. Small, often clandestine studios tucked between bustling barber shops and dimly lit billiard halls. And while most tattoo artists were still men, women were courageously beginning to enter the craft, needle in hand, carving out their own space in this once male-dominated world. The ink was spreading, no longer simply a defiant mark of rebellion, but subtly transforming into a medium for deeply personal memory, a powerful statement of identity, or simply the sheer thrill of wearing something beautiful and permanent that no one, no matter their power, could ever take away. As the 20th century marched relentlessly forward, bringing with it towering skyscrapers, sweeping revolutions, and two devastating world wars, tattoos continued their quiet, often unseen evolution, but not always in the light. Behind cold prison walls, in locked, desolate cells, and across barren concrete yards, a brutal, yet incredibly expressive new language of ink was being written. Not on paper, but directly onto skin. These weren't the polished, hygienic studio tattoos of the outside world. They were handmade, raw, often crudely rendered, created with ingenious contraband needles fashioned from guitar strings or melted plastic, and ink brewed from soot mixed with toothpaste or whatever pigment could be scavenged. Painful, absolutely. Precise, rarely. Meaningful, always. In prisons across the world, from the brutal Russian gulags to the sprawling American penitentiaries, tattoos became a secret code, a visual dialect known only to the initiated. Every image told a story, every placement carried immense weight. A spiderweb intricately tattooed on the elbow could signify years served behind bars. A teardrop near the eye might mean a life taken, or, sometimes, a life tragically lost. The 5 dots on the hand, for corners and one in the center, was a universal symbol that declared, "I am surrounded," a stark statement of being imprisoned. In Soviet prisons, tattooing evolved into an astonishingly detailed system of status, crime, and survival. A grand cathedral inked across the chest could signal decades behind bars, each dome representing a lengthy sentence. Stars on the shoulders marked a high-ranking inmate, someone not to be disrespected, but faking such a rank through ink could, and often did, get you killed. These tattoos weren't just decoration. They were armor, a visual resume of one's criminal career, a stark warning to others, and often a silent prayer for endurance. In the United States, prison tattoos carried similar, heavy weight, signaling gang affiliations, racial lines, territorial claims, and deeply personal losses. The makeshift tattoo gun was often a shared tool, passed between inmates like a contraband communion. For many, their first tattoo wasn't a choice. It was a brutal rite of passage, a forced initiation into a new, unforgiving reality. But even outside the walls, these prison-born styles, with their stark, bold lines and raw imagery, began to leak into the wider world. Artists, especially in urban areas, started incorporating the powerful, unvarnished aesthetic of prison art into their own work. What started as a means of survival and communication behind bars became a recognized style, replicated in professional shops, immortalized in movies, and echoed in street culture. Still, the pervasive stigma clung stubbornly. A visible tattoo, especially one on the hands, neck, or face, often meant closed doors, immediate judgment, and unwarranted suspicion. The ink might fade over time, but the harsh assumptions stubbornly remained. Yet, for the ones who wore them, those marks weren't symbols of shame. They were potent stories of survival, of time endured with stoicism, of an identity fiercely carved in silence. Because sometimes, when no one listens, the skin itself speaks. By the dawn of the 21st century, tattoos had undergone their greatest transformation yet, evolving from an ancient, sacred rite to an outlaw code, and now, to something else entirely, a limitless canvas for the self. What was once relegated to the shadows, hidden beneath sleeves, or discussed in hushed tones of judgment, was now boldly and beautifully unveiled. Tattoos became prominent fixtures on high-fashion runways, discreet yet confident statements in corporate boardrooms, and ubiquitous declarations across every social media feed. From the artistic barista to the visionary CEO, from the nurturing kindergarten teacher to the battle-hardened veteran, the presence of ink no longer carried the singular connotation of rebellion. Instead, it had matured into a profound and personal declaration of identity, a visual narrative of selfhood. This profound cultural shift was mirrored in the transformation of tattoo studios themselves. Gone were the days of clandestine backroom shops, dimly lit by flickering neon signs and shrouded in an air of illicit mystique. Many evolved into bright, inviting sanctuaries of artistic expression. These modern studios, often meticulously clean, curated with an eye for design, and adorned with captivating artwork, resembled contemporary art galleries more than the gritty dens of old. And the artists themselves? They ascended to new heights of recognition, becoming celebrities in their own right. Armed with extensive portfolios showcasing their unique styles, these coveted artists commanded long waiting lists, with passionate fans traveling across continents, even flying halfway around the world, just for the privilege of sitting in their chair and having their vision brought to life. The world of tattoo artistry exploded with an unprecedented diversity of styles. Delicate watercolor tattoos blended hues with ethereal grace, while ultra-fine line minimalism offered subtle, elegant statements. Realism achieved an astonishing fidelity, rendering portraits and scenes so sharp and detailed they rivaled high-resolution photographs. Ancient and spiritual traditions resurfaced, manifesting in intricate sacred geometry and powerful cultural revival designs. The deeply personal found expression in portraits of beloved pets, cherished loved ones, or even entire life stories meticulously woven into sprawling pieces from spine to wrist. Advancements in technology played a crucial supporting role. Tattoo machines became quieter, operating with greater precision. Needles grew finer, allowing for intricate detail. Inks were formulated to be safer and more vibrant, and healing times significantly shortened, making the entire process more accessible and comfortable. Yet, beneath these aesthetic and technical evolutions, the timeless, primal reasons for marking the skin endured. People still sought tattoos for the very same things they always had: to embody memory, to navigate mourning, to claim personal power, or to signify a profound rebirth. Some tattoos meticulously charted life's pivotal milestones: a birth, a death, a wedding, a new beginning. Others served as powerful shields, artfully concealing scars, both the visible marks on the skin and the deeper, hidden wounds of the soul. Many chose to adorn themselves after escaping abusive relationships, reclaiming agency over their bodies. Some honored ancestors, carrying their legacy on their skin. Others bravely inscribed their survival in symbols, a silent language for truths too profound or painful to speak aloud. And yes, amidst all this profound meaning, there was always room for whimsy. Some people, after all, just really liked frogs and cowboy hats. There's room for that delightful eccentricity too. Across the globe, indigenous tattoo practices, once suppressed, shamed, or even outlawed by colonial powers, began to resurface with renewed pride and vigor. The intricate facial markings of Moritamoko from New Zealand, the revered skin stitching techniques of the Inuit, and the powerful hand-tap designs of Filipino Bach all saw a powerful revival. New generations, driven by a desire to reconnect with their heritage and strengthen ancestral bonds, embraced these ancient forms, weaving lineage and identity through every carefully placed line. Yet, this resurgence was not without its complexities. Debates lingered, and indeed intensified, around issues of cultural appropriation. Who has the right to wear these sacred symbols? There were concerns about over-commercialization, questioning whether something deeply sacred could retain its spiritual essence when it became a fleeting trend in a global market. But perhaps that very tension, that constant interplay, is where the enduring beauty of tattooing lies. Tattoos have always existed in a dynamic space between pain and pride, between the undeniable permanence of the mark and the fluid impermanence of self, between who we are now and who we aspire to be. And so, we invariably return to where it all began, ink pressed into skin. A story told not with spoken words, but with indelible imagery, a mark made not for external approval, but for an internal, unshakable truth. And in that quiet, ancient, yet ever-evolving language of tattooing that has always been, and will always be, enough. The saga of the space race, that epic clash of ambition and ingenuity, did not originate with the sleek lines of a spaceship or the wide-eyed wonder of a stargazer's dream. It was born from the brutal crucible of war. World War II had left the planet scarred and broken. Cities lay in shattered ruins. Geopolitical borders were painstakingly redrawn, and in the ashes of the old world, two colossal superpowers emerged, starkly poised on opposite sides of a new global order. The United States and the Soviet Union, once bound by the necessity of an uneasy wartime alliance, now stood as fierce ideological adversaries. It was capitalism versus communism, democracy versus dictatorship, locked in a chilling embrace of distrust. And in the remnants of Nazi Germany's formidable war machine, both sides found not just resources, but rather something or someone they desperately wanted. Wernher von Braun, the brilliant, controversial German engineer behind the devastating V-2 rocket program, was captured by American forces and quietly spirited away to the U.S. under the clandestine Operation Paperclip. Not to be outdone, the Soviets swiftly seized their own share of German scientists and invaluable rocketry research. The spoils of this new kind of war now included not just territory, but rocket fuel, intricate blueprints, and the formidable minds capable of making them fly. The Cold War had truly begun, not with the deafening roar of gunfire, but with a chilling shroud of silence and an omnipresent atmosphere of suspicion. Each superpower embarked on a frantic, covert race to construct not only more powerful bombs, but also, crucially, the sophisticated delivery systems for them. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, rapidly became the ultimate symbol of power and a terrifying new instrument of deterrence. These were rockets capable of launching nuclear warheads from one continent to annihilate another. Yet, amidst this grim arms race, an audacious and game-changing question eventually arose. What if, instead of pointing these colossal machines of destruction toward enemy cities, we aimed them toward the boundless expanse of the stars? Space, thus, became the next critical frontier, not initially for the pure pursuit of scientific exploration, but for strategic domination. It was never simply about scientific advancement. Whoever reached space first would not only claim moral superiority on the world stage, but also demonstrate unparalleled technological supremacy, commanding global awe and perhaps fear. For the Soviets, the challenge was intensely personal. After years of unfathomable devastation and an enforced period of international isolation, they saw space as an unparalleled opportunity to prove their enduring strength and resilience, both to the world and, perhaps more importantly, to themselves. In the United States, the space race swiftly escalated into a matter of paramount national pride and urgent strategic necessity. To lose, in this high-stakes game, was not merely a failure. It was perceived as a dire threat to national security and global standing. And so, two powerful nations turned their gaze to the heavens, not with the idle wonder of ancient astronomers, but with a desperate, all-consuming urgency. Rockets were no longer merely weapons. They had been redefined as soaring ladders to prestige, each launch a testament to a nation's will and might. And somewhere, far above Earth's fragile atmosphere, a silent, epic-defining race had commenced. It was a race of machines, pushing the very limits of human engineering. It was a race of men, driven by courage, ambition, and a relentless will to succeed. It was a race where the elusive finish line was not a geographical place, but a transcendent, shared dream for the future. The night was clear and cool, October 4th, 1957, when the world, quite unexpectedly, changed forever. It was not with a devastating bang, but with a simple, persistent beep. From a desolate launch site nestled in the barren, windswept steppes of Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union launched a small, metallic sphere into Earth's orbit. It was named Sputnik 1. This shiny aluminum ball, no larger than a beach ball and weighing just under 200 pounds, sported four long, slender antennas protruding from its sides. It carried no camera, no living passengers, just a simple radio transmitter that continuously emitted a steady stream of repetitive beeps as it silently circled Earth every 96 minutes. But those unassuming beeps, broadcast across the globe, echoed like a mighty thunderclap. To the Soviets, Sputnik was irrefutable proof of their triumph, a resounding affirmation of their scientific and engineering prowess. It was the first artificial satellite ever successfully launched by humankind, the very first object crafted by human hands to break free from the gravitational pull of Earth and enter the vastness of space. It represented a staggering technical achievement, one that unequivocally meant their rocket technology worked. And, more alarmingly for the West, it meant they were undeniably ahead. To the Americans, it was a sudden, jarring wake-up call, starkly wrapped in polished aluminum. A palpable wave of panic rippled through the United States. If the Soviets possessed the capability to launch a satellite into space with such apparent ease, then they certainly had the means to launch a nuclear warhead across the vast expanse of the ocean, landing it squarely on American soil. Schools across the nation began to run chilling duck and cover drills, preparing children for a nuclear attack. Headlines screamed with terrifying pronouncements of a new red moon dominating the skies. And in living rooms across the country, families gazed up at the night sky, consumed by a chilling question: are they watching us now? Sputnik was not merely a satellite, it was a potent signal. It starkly informed the world that the USSR had indeed reached space first, irrevocably transforming the cosmos into a new, terrifying battlefield of prestige, politics, and pervasive paranoia. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, in a public display of calm, attempted to reassure the nation, insisting that the U.S. was not falling behind. Yet, behind the scenes, alarm bells rang with deafening clarity within the White House and Pentagon. Funding for science and technology programs skyrocketed with unprecedented speed. Congress, in a swift and decisive move, rushed to create the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. American schoolchildren, once encouraged to pursue careers in the arts or humanities, were suddenly exhorted to rigorously study math and physics, not just to secure good jobs, but to defend the very concept of freedom. Within a mere month, the Soviets escalated the challenge further, launching Sputnik 2, this time carrying a passenger. Laika, a small, courageous stray dog plucked from the cold streets of Moscow. Laika became the first living creature to orbit the Earth, a tragic pioneer who, heartbreakingly, would not survive the flight. But the message her journey conveyed was clear and stark. The Soviets weren't just ahead, they were rapidly accelerating their pace. And now, for the first time in history, humanity was no longer entirely alone among the stars. We had sent something, someone, up into that infinite void, and the space race had truly, irrevocably begun. The shockwave of Sputnik's success hit the United States with profound force. In living rooms gripped by fear, in laboratories buzzing with renewed urgency, in classrooms frantically adapting, and on Capitol Hill grappling with national pride, the United States was forced to confront a difficult, humiliating truth. It had been decisively beaten into space. Not by a historically more powerful nation, but by one that had, until recently, been a devastated wartime ally, now transformed into a fierce ideological rival. The pressing question was no longer just, how did they do it, but rather, what do we do now? The answer arrived swiftly and decisively. In 1958, the United States established a brand new agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, universally known as NASA. Forged from the remnants of earlier, smaller aerospace programs, NASA was far more than just another government agency. It was a powerful declaration, an unwavering commitment, and a solemn promise that America would not only catch up to the Soviets, but would ultimately surpass and lead them. Yet, America's first satellite, Explorer 1, wasn't successfully launched until January 31, 1958, nearly 4 agonizing months after Sputnik. Still, Explorer 1 carried more than just a radio beep. It carried crucial scientific instruments, leading to the groundbreaking discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts, proving that the U.S. wasn't merely chasing, but actively contributing profound scientific knowledge. The space race had, by this point, become an all-encompassing national mission. Television programs for children suddenly featured segments on space science, captivating young imaginations. Schools rapidly integrated rocket math into their curriculums. Funding for science, engineering, and mathematics surged to unprecedented levels. American national identity itself became inextricably linked to the cosmos, to the boundless frontier above. But politics, ever present, continued to steer the rocket's trajectory. This wasn't solely about scientific curiosity. It was fundamentally about Cold War dominance. Space was the new high ground. Whoever controlled it would command global communications, strategic defense, and immense international prestige. The U.S. feared falling irredeemably behind in the eyes of the world, especially newly independent nations poised to choose between capitalist democracy and communist rule. Enter Project Mercury, America's ambitious first manned spaceflight program. 7 elite test pilots, later immortalized as the Mercury 7, were carefully selected to represent not just NASA, but the collective hopes and dreams of an entire nation. They trained in the deepest secrecy, enduring punishing physical and psychological tests that pushed them to their absolute limits. And, even before they had ever left the ground, they were transformed into iconic heroes, symbols of American grit and ingenuity. Meanwhile, the Soviets were quietly preparing to raise the stakes even further, understanding that satellites were only the opening gambit. The next monumental goal was clear, chillingly ambitious, and utterly imperative: to send a human into space and, crucially, bring them safely home again. For America, the challenge was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was real, intensely personal, and incredibly urgent. It was only a matter of time before someone, Soviet or American, would risk their very life to cross that invisible, ultimate boundary between Earth and everything beyond it. April 12, 1961. Just as the first rays of sunrise kissed the vast, empty expanse of the Kazakh desert, a slender, silver rocket stood majestically on the launch pad, towering, silent, and poised to change the course of human history. Inside its cramped, spherical capsule sat a 27-year-old Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin. Remarkably, he was calm, even smiling slightly, clad in a distinctive orange flight suit and a white helmet. He looked more like a meticulous test pilot than a trailblazing pioneer. But what he was about to do had never been done by any human being: leave Earth entirely. At precisely 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, the Vostok 1 spacecraft roared to life with an earth-shattering thunder. Gagarin's voice, remarkably steady, crackled through the radio with a single, iconic word that would echo across the planet and through time: poiekali. Let's go? With that, he became the first human being to enter the unforgiving realm of space. The historic flight lasted a mere 108 minutes. Gagarin completed one full, breathtaking orbit around Earth, reaching a peak altitude of 187 miles and traveling at an astonishing speed of over 17,000 miles per hour. He looked down and witnessed our planet from an entirely new perspective: the mesmerizing blue curve of Earth, the profound blackness of space, and, strikingly, no borders. He later described what he saw with simple, almost childlike wonder. The Earth is blue. How beautiful! It is amazing. But make no mistake, this was far more than just a glorious moment of human achievement. It was a geopolitical earthquake of monumental proportions. The Soviets had done it first. Again, after Sputnik, after Laika, they had now sent a man into space and, perhaps even more importantly, returned him safely. Yuri Gagarin didn't just orbit Earth. He orbited every front page on the planet, his image and story dominating global news. The Soviets paraded him like a conquering champion, transforming him into a potent symbol of socialist superiority and unparalleled scientific might. The United States, stunned once more into disbelief and a fresh wave of alarm, scrambled frantically to respond. President John F. Kennedy, only a few months into his presidency, now faced immense pressure to not only match, but ultimately surpass this latest Soviet triumph. Yuri Gagarin returned to Earth an immediate, global hero, landing unexpectedly in a remote field and momentarily startling a bewildered farmer and her daughter before calmly explaining that he had just arrived from space. He never flew in space again, but his name was forever etched into the annals of history. Because on that pivotal day, humanity collectively crossed a line we had only ever dared to imagine. We were no longer merely earthbound. One man, one orbit, and the space race had officially entered its most thrilling, most human chapter. Just a few short, tense weeks after Yuri Gagarin made his indelible mark on history, the United States was reeling from the Soviet triumph, but it was far from defeated. While the Soviets had claimed the undeniably significant first victory in human spaceflight, America had its own audacious plan already in motion, designed not just to match, but ultimately to surpass the Soviet achievements. America's crucial first step was Alan Shepard. On May 5, 1961, Shepard, a highly decorated Navy test pilot, bravely climbed into the cramped confines of the Mercury Redstone 3 spacecraft, famously nicknamed Freedom 7. Shepard's mission, unlike Gagarin's orbital flight, was not to circle the Earth. Instead, his was a suborbital flight, a brief but utterly crucial hop into the lower reaches of space that would prove, unequivocally, that the U.S. could send humans beyond the atmosphere and, critically, bring them back alive. The stakes were incredibly high, with the eyes of the world fixed on the Cape. Shepard's flight was only projected to last a mere 15 minutes, a fleeting moment in space, but it was intended as a powerful, public declaration. The United States was unequivocally in the race, and it was absolutely not about to lose it. The countdown began, punctuated by agonizing pauses, and at 9:34 a.m., the rocket launched with a deafening roar that literally shook the ground for miles around. Shepard soared upward, climbing to an altitude of 116 miles above Earth, entering space for just a few precious minutes. As he floated weightlessly, bathed in the silent grandeur of space, he experienced a profound moment of awe, gazing down upon the vibrant blue planet unfurling below him. He didn't have the luxury of looking long. His mission was purely a test. After a short, thrilling, yet meticulously controlled journey, Shepard's flight took a sharp, controlled descent, culminating in a splashdown in the vast Atlantic Ocean. Shepard was immediately rescued by a waiting Navy ship, plucked from the sea like a hero. And as he stepped out of his capsule, visibly exhilarated, he was instantly hailed as a national hero, the first American in space. Shepard's flight, while not as impressive in terms of time or distance as Gagarin's full orbital mission, was nevertheless a crucial, indispensable step in the burgeoning U.S. space program. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Americans possessed the capability to launch men into space, and, more importantly, they could return them safely. The United States had officially, spectacularly entered the race for human spaceflight, and while it had been a short flight, it was a long, confident leap toward the ultimate, audacious goal, the moon. Shepard's success, a much-needed morale boost, spurred NASA into a flurry of accelerated action and renewed determination. The Mercury program's initial triumph now confidently paved the way for the more ambitious Gemini and, eventually, the groundbreaking Apollo programs. The U.S. was now resolutely determined to go further, to ascend higher, and, above all, to finally reach that ultimate frontier. The race to the moon was no longer just a competition of rockets and raw power. It was a deeply personal contest of national pride, an unyielding testament to the human will to reach beyond the perceived limits of possibility. And the stakes, having already been astronomical, had now never been higher. With Alan Shepard's pioneering suborbital flight and the brief but groundbreaking Mercury missions firmly behind them, the United States had decisively proven its capability to send humans into the vastness of space. But now, NASA faced an even bigger, more complex question. Could they go further? Could they endure longer periods in space? And, most critically, could they achieve the seemingly impossible task of reaching the moon? Enter the Gemini program, ingeniously conceived as the vital bridge between the foundational Mercury missions and the grand, audacious Apollo endeavors. Gemini was designed to be the critical testing ground, a crucible for developing and refining the advanced technologies and intricate techniques that would be absolutely required to land a human on the lunar surface. Launched in 1965, the Gemini program was specifically engineered to push the very limits of human spaceflight. It was bigger, bolder, and significantly more ambitious than its predecessor. The Gemini spacecraft itself was twice as large as the single-person Mercury capsule and, crucially, was capable of carrying 2 astronauts, making it the first program to intentionally push the boundaries of extended space missions. Gemini's inaugural flight, Gemini 3, took place on March 23, 1965, with courageous astronauts Virgil Gus, Grissom, and John Young aboard. Their mission was relatively brief, a simple orbit of Earth, but it marked a pivotal turning point in the trajectory of human space exploration. Grissom's flight lasted just under 5 hours, yet it conclusively proved that 2 men could not only survive together in the cramped confines of space, but could also actively pilot and maneuver a spacecraft, meticulously managing critical life support systems while in orbit. The Gemini missions rapidly began to increase in complexity and ambition. Gemini 4, in June 1965, marked another monumental first, the inaugural American spacewalk. Astronaut Ed White, tethered by a golden umbilical, floated majestically in the silent vacuum of space for a breathtaking 23 minutes, becoming a fleeting star against the blackness. This was an enormous, unprecedented step forward, demonstrating that humans could effectively operate outside the confines of their spacecraft, a skill that would be absolutely essential for future lunar exploration. Gemini also introduced and perfected other vital techniques that would ultimately make the Apollo mission possible. Orbital rendezvous and docking, the delicate art of 2 spacecraft finding and linking up in orbit, a maneuver critical for the eventual lunar mission, where a lander would detach from an orbiter and later reconnect. The program's ultimate, overarching goal was to meticulously prepare astronauts to operate effectively in the deep reaches of space, even if it meant spending days or even weeks in orbit, performing increasingly complex maneuvers and rigorously testing the physical and psychological endurance required for much longer, more distant missions. By the time Gemini 12 completed its final mission in November 1966, the essential groundwork had been meticulously laid. America was, by all accounts, truly ready for the moon, and the Soviet Union, though still ahead in some specific areas, had comparatively little to show for its efforts in human spaceflight during this critical period. The United States was gearing up for its grandest, most audacious challenge yet, a challenge that would not only test the very limits of technology, but, more profoundly, the indomitable spirit of humanity. The race to the moon was heating up to an incandescent degree, and the finish line, once a distant fantasy, was now tantalizingly within reach. The year was 1961. President John F. Kennedy, acutely inspired by the mounting geopolitical tension of the Cold War and deeply challenged by the Soviets' early triumphs in space, made a bold and visionary proclamation that would electrify the nation and set the stage for one of humanity's greatest feats of exploration. On May 25th, he stood before a joint session of Congress and, with unshakable conviction, declared that the United States would commit itself to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth before this decade is out. The stakes were now unequivocally clear, etched in the national consciousness. It was no longer simply about sending humans into space. It was about definitively reaching the moon and ensuring their safe return. This extraordinary vision led directly to the birth of Apollo, NASA's ambitious program designed specifically and singularly for lunar exploration. The goal was unprecedented in human history: to transport astronauts to the moon, land them safely on its desolate surface, and then return them triumphantly to Earth. The Apollo program thus became America's full-throttle, unequivocal response to the Soviet Union's series of achievements, a definitive answer to their perceived dominance in the early stages of the space race. The very first step in this monumental endeavor was Apollo 1, a mission tragically marred by a devastating fire on January 27, 1967. The fire, which erupted during a routine pre-launch test on the pad, claimed the lives of courageous astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee. It was a devastating setback, a moment of profound national grief and introspection. However, this tragedy also served as a harsh, unyielding catalyst, spurring a comprehensive overhaul of NASA's safety protocols, spacecraft design, and equipment. The Apollo program, with renewed determination and an unshakable commitment to innovation, pressed on, forever learning from the profound loss of those brave men. In 1968, Apollo 8 became the first mission to successfully send astronauts into lunar orbit. As the crew, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders, circled the moon on Christmas Eve, they became the first humans to ever witness the far side of the moon with their own eyes. The iconic sight of Earth, a vibrant blue marble, rising majestically above the stark, desolate lunar surface from the spacecraft's window, was an image that captivated the world's imagination and marked an indelible milestone in human exploration, bringing humanity closer to the moon than ever before. But the ultimate goal, the audacious promise of a lunar landing, still lay ahead, a shimmering beacon in the night sky. The world watched with bated breath as NASA meticulously prepared for Apollo 11, the mission that would transform Kennedy's audacious dream into a stunning reality. Tensions between the U.S. and USSR remained palpable, a silent undercurrent beneath the global excitement. But the United States was fiercely determined to reach the moon first. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, two ordinary men undertaking an extraordinary feat, made history. As Armstrong, clad in his bulky spacesuit, carefully descended the ladder from the lunar module, the Eagle, and took his momentous first step onto the powdery surface of the moon, he famously declared, his voice crackling with static across hundreds of thousands of miles, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The United States had done it. The moon was no longer just a distant, enigmatic point of light in the sky. It was a tangible place where humans had stood, a new world conquered. The space race, in its purest, most symbolic form, had been decisively won, but humanity's grand journey of exploration beyond Earth was, in reality, just beginning. On that historic day, July 20th, 1969, America had achieved the previously unthinkable. It had successfully landed a man on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission had not only fulfilled President Kennedy's audacious promise, but had resonated throughout the globe. Neil Armstrong's solitary first step onto the lunar surface echoed not just as a national victory for the United States, but as a shared, monumental triumph for all of humanity. Yet, the space race, in its broader implications, was far from over. After the unprecedented glory of Apollo 11, the pressing question that immediately arose was, what comes next? For NASA, the immediate task was to meticulously complete the remaining Apollo program missions. With 5 more successful moon landings conducted between 1969 and 1972, astronauts meticulously explored different, previously untouched parts of the lunar surface, conducting invaluable scientific experiments and collecting precious rock samples that would offer crucial clues to the moon's ancient history and formation. Each subsequent mission reinforced the U.S. position as the undisputed, dominant leader in space exploration. However, while the Apollo program was undeniably a resounding success in terms of achievement, It came at an immense cost, both financially, consuming a vast percentage of the national budget, and, tragically, in terms of human lives. The program had consumed immense resources and commanded an almost singular national attention. By the early 1970s, political support for further, massively expensive lunar missions began to wane. The Cold War was still very much a reality, but the intense urgency to outdo the Soviet Union specifically in the realm of deep space was gradually fading. As a direct result, the Apollo program was abruptly cut short after Apollo 17 in 1972, with planned missions canceled. The immediate focus of American space exploration consequently shifted inward to Earth's orbit. The Skylab program, launched in 1973, became America's first space station, a pioneering orbital laboratory where astronauts lived and worked for extended periods, conducting groundbreaking experiments in microgravity and observing Earth. Skylab definitively demonstrated the viability of humans living and performing complex work in space for prolonged durations, laying crucial groundwork for future, larger space stations and eventual deep space missions. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, despite its initial spectacular successes in the early stages of the space race, began to slow its more ambitious space efforts, particularly in the race to the moon, which they never achieved. Although it had succeeded in sending the first human into space, the USSR's lunar landing program faced significant technical hurdles and setbacks. Nevertheless, the Soviets continued with impressive unmanned missions to explore Venus and Mars, and they vigorously launched their own space station program, the Salyut series, which eventually led to the construction of Mir. Mir, a massive, modular orbital research station, became a powerful symbol of Soviet scientific ambition and long-duration space habitation, hosting cosmonauts for record-breaking periods in space. But it was the Space Shuttle program that would decisively define the next era of American space exploration. Launched in 1981, the Space Shuttle was ingeniously designed to be reusable, a revolutionary concept that promised greater cost efficiency by allowing for multiple missions with the same spacecraft. The shuttle era promised unprecedented accessibility to space, enabling regular cargo and crew missions to low Earth orbit and, ultimately, facilitating the construction of the International Space Station. Despite the immense promise of these new frontiers, the early shuttle flights were fraught with complex technical challenges, and the tragic loss of the Challenger in 1986 served as a stark, heart-wrenching reminder to the entire world of the inherent risks involved in pushing humanity's boundaries. But space exploration, driven by an unyielding, shared desire to learn, to grow, and to continually push the boundaries of what was possible, continued relentlessly. The era dominated by government space agencies, largely defined by the intense rivalry of the space race and the Cold War competition, began to gradually give way to a new age, one that increasingly saw the dynamic involvement of private companies and a growing spirit of international collaboration. The end of the Cold War in the early 1990s profoundly shifted the focus away from nationalistic rivalry, but humanity's fascination with space exploration remained as captivating and compelling as ever. In the 1990s, the International Space Station, ISS, began its ambitious construction in low Earth orbit. Launched in 1998, the ISS represented a groundbreaking, unprecedented collaboration between the United States, Russia, Canada, Japan, and several European nations. This colossal orbital laboratory became a powerful, living symbol of what the world could achieve when working together, transcending the nationalistic ambitions and geopolitical tensions of the past, and unequivocally placing scientific research and peaceful cooperation above competition. It grew into humanity's largest and most complex space laboratory, majestically orbiting Earth at an astonishing speed of over 17,000 miles per hour, with astronauts from diverse nations living and working together in space for extended, cooperative periods. While the ISS continues to serve as an invaluable hub for international cooperation, cutting-edge scientific research, and technological innovation, It also laid the crucial groundwork for an entirely new, transformative direction in space exploration, the burgeoning privatization of space. Enter SpaceX, founded by the visionary entrepreneur Elon Musk in 2002. Musk's overarching vision was clear, audacious, and seemingly impossible: to drastically reduce the cost of space travel and ultimately make it possible for humans to live on other planets, particularly Mars. SpaceX's relentless success in developing and perfecting reusable rockets revolutionized the entire paradigm of space travel, challenging decades of traditional aerospace engineering. In 2012, SpaceX's Dragon capsule achieved a historic milestone, becoming the first privately built spacecraft to successfully deliver cargo to the International Space Station. In 2020, SpaceX achieved yet another breathtaking milestone when its Crew Dragon spacecraft safely carried American astronauts to the ISS, marking the first time since the Space Shuttle's retirement in 2011 that American astronauts were launched into space from U.S. soil, breaking a near-decade reliance on Russian rockets. SpaceX, however, was not the only private player in this rapidly expanding cosmic arena. Companies like Blue Origin, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and Virgin Galactic, founded by Sir Richard Branson, have also made significant strides in the realm of commercial space travel, largely focusing on suborbital flights for space tourism and cutting-edge research. These groundbreaking companies are not just changing the fundamental business model of space. They are, more profoundly, redefining what is possible for private citizens to experience in space, ushering in an era where the cosmos might one day be accessible not just to government astronauts, but to anyone with the means and the courage to look up and reach for the stars. The future of space exploration, once the exclusive purview of government agencies, has dramatically expanded its horizons, now boldly encompassing ambitious plans for permanent lunar colonies, pioneering Mars missions, and vibrant commercial space stations orbiting Earth. Visionary companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are not merely dreaming. They are actively developing the foundational infrastructure essential to transform interplanetary travel from science fiction into an attainable reality. Indeed, the successful test flights of SpaceX's Starship in 2021, specifically designed for deep space ventures, heralded a new era of capability. Parallel to this, NASA has forged strategic partnerships with private firms, spearheading the Artemis lunar program. This monumental endeavor aims not just to return humanity to the moon, but to establish a sustainable presence there by the close of the 2020s. Space, once the ultimate domain of a select few superpowers, is swiftly evolving into an accessible frontier, beckoning numerous nations and pioneering private enterprises. The audacious dream of exploring Mars, of planting the flag of human presence on other celestial bodies, is no longer confined to the pages of speculative fiction. It represents the defining next great leap in humanity's ceaseless ambition. And just as during the fervor of the original space race, the stars are calling once again, a call that resonates with the timeless human impulse to explore, to discover, and to reach for the seemingly impossible. Yet, this relentless drive for discovery is not solely directed towards the heavens. For centuries, another profound mystery, an earthly wonder, has whispered from beneath the golden sands of Egypt. In that vast, sun-baked expanse, where ancient echoes linger and the sky blazes with an almost primeval intensity, a lost marvel of the ancient world is believed to lie hidden. This place, according to the venerable Greek historian Herodotus, was more magnificent than even the iconic pyramids of Giza. It was known as the Labyrinth, a colossal underground complex unlike anything ever conceived, stretching deep beneath the earth and the very monuments of Egypt. The Egyptians themselves, in their own accounts, described it as a breathtaking testament to both architectural genius and unparalleled ingenuity. A labyrinthine structure so incredibly intricate it seemed to defy the very limits of human imagination. Herodotus, the father of history, who embarked on extensive travels in the 5th century BC, became one of the first outsiders to chronicle this astonishing sight. During his journeys, he was guided to Egypt, where he was granted the extraordinary opportunity to witness the labyrinth firsthand. What unfolded before his eyes left him utterly awestruck. According to his detailed writings, the structure comprised immense chambers, labyrinthine corridors painstakingly designed, and towering walls that far surpassed the grandeur of any known edifice of his time. It was not merely a building. It was an entire subterranean world, a veritable maze of monumental proportions, teeming with secrets and hidden spaces that seemed to stretch into eternity. The labyrinth, Herodotus vividly described, encompassed a staggering 12 immense courtyards, each meticulously surrounded by imposing, high stone walls, creating a sequence of fortresses within a fortress. Inside, the chambers were adorned with an opulent array of carvings, statues, and intricate inscriptions, depicting the pantheon of gods and the revered kings who had governed Egypt throughout the ages. And perhaps most intriguing of all, Herodotus marveled at the sheer, unimaginable scale of the structure. Not just a few rooms or winding passageways, but a sprawling, interconnected complex that extended across vast, enigmatic areas. So immense and bewilderingly complex, Herodotus famously claimed that it was utterly impossible to explore it in its entirety. He even dared to compare it to the pyramids themselves, asserting that the labyrinth was, in fact, more wondrous and overwhelmingly impressive. But like so many ancient marvels, destined to be consumed by the relentless march of time, the labyrinth slowly faded from view, gradually concealed beneath the insatiable sands of Egypt. Over the centuries, its tangible reality transmuted into a powerful legend. Despite its immense historical and architectural significance, it mysteriously vanished from the annals of documented history, seemingly swallowed whole by the shifting desert dunes, as though the very land had conspired to reclaim its secrets. Today, scholars and archaeologists, fueled by a blend of historical curiosity and cutting-edge technology, relentlessly continue their quest for the lost labyrinth. Their enduring hope is to unearth its long-held secrets and finally unlock the profound mysteries that have stubbornly remained hidden for millennia. The labyrinth that Herodotus so meticulously described was far more than a mere building. It was a masterpiece of design, an intricate marvel that appeared to stretch the very boundaries of human ingenuity. According to his account, the structure was not simply a collection of rooms or utilitarian passageways. It was a sprawling, enigmatic complex whose staggering scale and bewildering complexity stood as an enduring testament to the ancient Egyptians' profound mastery of architecture and engineering. Herodotus famously noted that the labyrinth contained 12 courtyards, each grand and distinct, separated by towering stone walls that encased the entire complex like a series of impenetrable, fortress-like enclosures. These formidable walls, far from being stark, were adorned with exquisite carvings and scenes, intricately depicting the gods, the kings, and the myriad mythological creatures that populated the rich tapestry of Egyptian beliefs. Some of these depictions were so incredibly detailed, so meticulously rendered, that they were said to appear almost lifelike, a breathtaking fusion of art and monumental architecture. What truly distinguished the labyrinth was its sheer, overwhelming scale. Herodotus portrayed it as an immense network of interconnected chambers, some so vast that they could conceivably house entire villages within their stone embrace. He continued his comparison to the pyramids, emphasizing its equal, if not superior, magnificence. However, unlike the pyramids, which often held a singular, monumental focus, the labyrinth seemed to harbor endless secrets, with each turn, each passageway, leading deeper into another perplexing mystery. Herodotus also noted the astonishing number of statues that populated the labyrinth's interior. These were not merely simple effigies. They were said to be works of immense artistic skill and profound spiritual significance. Some of these statues were crafted to resemble the powerful gods of Egypt, while others immortalized the pharaohs themselves in enduring stone. One particularly striking description involved a colossal statue of the god Osiris, which reputedly towered over the labyrinth's central chamber, serving as an omnipresent reminder of the divine presence that permeated the entire hallowed complex. Perhaps the most captivating aspect of Herodotus's account was his description of the labyrinth's bewildering layout. The rooms and passageways were not haphazardly arranged. Rather, they were ingeniously designed to confuse, to disorient, and to cultivate a profound sense of mystery, a true labyrinth in every conceivable sense of the word. Herodotus candidly admitted that it was utterly impossible to explore the entire structure in a single visit. It was simply too vast, too intricate, too overwhelming. He concluded his description with an enduring air of awe, observing that the labyrinth was a permanent wonder, one that would assuredly stand for millennia, or so it seemed at that time. But despite the profound grandeur of Herodotus's account, the labyrinth was inexorably lost to history, meticulously hidden beneath the relentless sands of Egypt, a tantalizing mystery patiently awaiting its rediscovery. The legend of this lost labyrinth has haunted generations of historians, archaeologists, and even intrepid treasure hunters for centuries, its enigmatic allure undiminished by time. Despite Herodotus's vivid and detailed descriptions of the magnificent underground complex, the labyrinth's precise location remains an enduring mystery, a riddle wrapped in sand. Scholars have long engaged in impassioned debates about where it might be hidden beneath the Egyptian sands, and whether it could still lie remarkably intact beneath the accumulating layers of time and the shifting dunes. Most contemporary experts generally concur that the labyrinth was most likely situated near Lake Moeris, an ancient, artificial lake nestled in the heart of the Egyptian desert, close to the Fayum oasis, approximately 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus himself specifically mentioned this very location as the site of the labyrinth, explicitly linking it to an impressive structure attributed to Pharaoh Amenemhat III during the 12th dynasty, circa 1800 BCE. The Fayum oasis, with its exceptionally fertile lands and strategic proximity to the Nile, had long flourished as a thriving and vital region of Egypt, and many believe that the labyrinth was an integral part of a much larger, ceremonial temple complex. This grand complex might well have been dedicated to the crocodile god Sobuk, whose ancient and powerful cult was prominently centered around that very area. Some compelling theories even suggest that the labyrinth itself was constructed as a monumental temple to Sobuk, perhaps designed to honor his profound association with the life-giving Nile and its cyclical rhythms. Over the years, numerous concerted attempts to locate the labyrinth have been made, but the ever-shifting desert sands have yielded little in the way of concrete, irrefutable evidence. In the 19th century, intrepid British archaeologists and explorers led ambitious expeditions into the Fayum region, yet they returned with only fragmented remnants and tantalizingly unclear artifacts. They did uncover some curious ruins, large, rectangular stone structures, which some optimistically believed might have once formed part of the labyrinth's colossal walls. However, these findings proved inconclusive, and to this day, no one has yet definitively identified a structure undeniably connected to the labyrinth itself. In modern times, cutting-edge technologies such as advanced satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and sophisticated drones have injected new hope and urgency into the quest for discovering the labyrinth. Yet, the desert remains impossibly vast, and the sand continues its ceaseless dance, burying anything that might lie beneath its ancient surface. In recent years, a new wave of researchers believes they may be drawing closer to pinpointing the labyrinth's elusive location, suggesting that the complex could be buried beneath what appears to be a series of vast, unexplored ruins nestled near the Fayum. Still, the labyrinth's exact whereabouts remain maddeningly elusive, and the sheer possibility of it still being hidden beneath the sand is both tantalizingly hopeful and profoundly frustrating. As with many of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world, the lost labyrinth calls out with an irresistible allure to those who dare to uncover its secrets. The pressing question is not merely where it lies, but what invaluable treasures, or even profound secrets, it might still hold within its silent, enduring walls. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was far from being just a monumental structure. It was an integral part of a much larger, intricately woven symbolic and spiritual landscape. To truly grasp the profound significance of the labyrinth, one must consider its nuanced relationship to Egypt's other great wonders, particularly the pyramids, which have long been revered as the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian architectural achievement. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed for the pharaoh Khufu, stands as an enduring testament to Egypt's unparalleled power and the sophisticated complexity of their religious and architectural systems. It comes as no surprise, then, that Herodotus, when describing the labyrinth, would draw a comparison to the pyramids, considering them both magnificent products of the same rich cultural and spiritual world. While the pyramids are most often associated with the elaborate burial of kings and the sacred journey to the afterlife, the labyrinth may have fulfilled a distinctly different, yet equally symbolism-steeped, function. Some compelling theories suggest that the labyrinth was conceived and constructed as a monumental temple complex dedicated not to one specific deity, but to the broader, overarching cosmic forces revered in Egypt, seamlessly incorporating the various gods and mythologies that govern the fundamental cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Much like the pyramids, the labyrinth's intricate design could have been inextricably tied to Egyptian cosmology. Ancient Egyptians held a deep belief in a complex, layered universe, one that fluidly blended the material and spiritual realms into a cohesive whole. The labyrinth, with its vast, bewildering corridors and hidden chambers, could have profoundly symbolized the arduous journey of the soul through the afterlife, a spiritual odyssey fraught with challenges and revelations. Similar to the pyramids, which were meticulously designed as elaborate tombs to facilitate the pharaoh's sacred passage into the next life, the comparison between the pyramids and the labyrinth strongly suggests that both were not merely monumental feats of engineering, but profound symbolic representations of life's greatest mysteries. Some scholars even propose that the labyrinth might have served a crucial ritualistic function, a sacred space where initiates would undergo a series of trials and profound spiritual experiences within its hallowed corridors, meticulously reflecting the soul's transformative journey through the underworld, a passageway to divine enlightenment, echoing the spiritual voyage symbolized by the pyramids. Furthermore, Herodotus himself firmly believed that the labyrinth possessed an intricate network of passages and chambers, strikingly similar in their complexity to the enigmatic passages found within the pyramids. This powerful idea suggests a deep, underlying architectural connection, a shared symbolic purpose designed to guide both the living and the dead through sacred spaces that deliberately blurred the boundaries between the material world and the eternal afterlife. Though the exact connection between the labyrinth and the pyramids remains tantalizingly unclear, one thing is certain. Both structures embody the grand, visionary scope of ancient Egypt, a civilization that consistently looked beyond the tangible physical world towards the profound mysteries of the cosmos and the eternal. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was far from being simply a structure built for pragmatic purposes like a palace or a bustling marketplace. Its very existence was shrouded in a profound, almost mystical, mystery, and the intricate design of the labyrinth itself strongly suggests it was a place of deep spiritual and symbolic significance. The complex network of corridors and chambers, its bewilderingly intricate layout, and its sheer, overwhelming scale all point to a much deeper purpose, one that transcends mere architectural achievement. Many prevailing theories suggest that the labyrinth was indeed a sacred site, a hallowed place where ancient rituals and deeply religious ceremonies were regularly performed. The labyrinth may have functioned as a sprawling temple complex dedicated to the worship of multiple gods, with the vibrant Egyptian pantheon of deities playing central, guiding roles in its overarching design and symbolic meaning. The Egyptians were, at their core, a profoundly religious people, and their monumental structures often carry deep spiritual meaning, with each edifice symbolizing different facets of the afterlife, cosmic order, and the soul's arduous journey. One particularly compelling theory posits that the labyrinth was a direct, physical representation of the afterlife itself. In ancient Egyptian belief, the journey to the afterlife was perceived as complex, treacherous, and fraught with peril. The soul of the deceased was believed to have to navigate countless challenges and formidable obstacles that stood between it and the divine realm. The labyrinth, with its maze-like structure and hidden chambers, may have profoundly symbolized the trials and tribulations the soul was destined to endure in the afterlife. Just as the deceased had to find their way through the winding, perplexing passages of the labyrinth, they also had to skillfully navigate the perilous journey through the underworld, guided by the gods and their unwavering faith. The labyrinth could also have served as a highly ritualistic space where priests and chosen initiates underwent intense spiritual tests and transformative trials. Some speculate that it was the very site of ancient Egyptian mystery schools, where sacred, esoteric knowledge was imparted only to carefully selected individuals. The initiates might have been meticulously led through the labyrinth in a carefully constructed ritual, precisely meant to mirror their own journey of spiritual enlightenment and profound self-discovery. The powerful idea of a physical labyrinth representing the journey of the soul is a potent one, as it would have provided a direct, tangible connection between the physical world and the spiritual one, inextricably linking the ancient Egyptians' profound understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Another prominent theory holds that the labyrinth was intricately connected to astronomical alignments. The ancient Egyptians were keenly aware of the stars and celestial movements, which not only guided their essential agricultural calendar but also permeated their religious practices. The labyrinth could have been meticulously built in alignment with the stars, with its passages and chambers meticulously reflecting the patterns of the night sky, perhaps mirroring the path of the sun or the soul's mystical journey through the stars. Whatever its true, ultimate purpose, the lost labyrinth remains a captivating enigma. Its profound symbolism, its enduring mysteries, and its deep, spiritual connection to the ancient Egyptian worldview continue to enthrall and captivate those who seek to uncover the secrets buried beneath the sands. For centuries, the lost labyrinth of Egypt has remained an enduring mystery, patiently buried beneath the shifting sands of time. Yet, the fascination with this incredible structure has not waned in the slightest. Rather, it has only intensified. Archaeologists, historians, and intrepid explorers continue their tireless search for the labyrinth, fervently hoping that the confluence of modern technology and a renewed global curiosity might finally unveil the profound secrets hidden beneath Egypt's vast, ancient desert. The search for the labyrinth has been a protracted and extraordinarily difficult endeavor. Early explorers and archaeologists, constrained by the limited tools and methodologies of their era, sought in vain for the legendary site, their efforts yielding little definitive success. In the 19th century, ambitious European expeditions ventured deep into the desert, particularly focusing around the Fayum Oasis and Lake Moeris, locations that Herodotus had specifically indicated as the labyrinth's possible whereabouts. However, these early searches, despite their earnestness, turned up little beyond scattered ruins and tantalizingly unclear remnants, enough to ignite sustained interest, but never quite enough to facilitate any definitive, conclusive discoveries. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the search for the labyrinth has experienced a powerful resurgence, gaining new momentum thanks to rapid advancements in technology. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and sophisticated modern excavation methods have provided archaeologists with fresh, unprecedented tools in the relentless quest for this lost wonder. With the invaluable aid of aerial surveys and high-resolution satellite imaging, researchers have been able to meticulously scan vast stretches of the desert where the labyrinth is widely believed to lie. Some scholars are now convinced that beneath the sands, there may still be hidden remains of massive stone structures, faint yet compelling echoes of the great labyrinth that Herodotus so eloquently described. One of the key locations consistently linked to the labyrinth is the area surrounding Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis, near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis. It was here, according to Herodotus and other invaluable ancient sources, that the labyrinth was reputedly constructed. The Fayum region was a verdant and exceptionally fertile oasis, and the area's undeniable importance in ancient Egyptian civilization makes it an incredibly promising candidate for housing such a monumental structure. Over the years, archaeologists have indeed uncovered traces of ancient stone foundations and various architectural remnants in this precise area, though they have yet to find definitive, irrefutable evidence of the labyrinth itself. In recent decades, there have been sporadic, intriguing reports of underwater ruins discovered in the area immediately surrounding Lake Moeris, sparking renewed and intense interest in the site. Some experts now theorize that significant parts of the labyrinth may lie submerged beneath the lake, patiently hidden by thousands of years of accumulated sediment and water. Others speculate that the labyrinth could be buried beneath an enormous sand dune near the remnants of other ancient Egyptian cities or temples. Despite these technological advancements and tantalizing clues, the labyrinth's definitive discovery remains maddeningly elusive. But the search is far from over. Each new excavation, every new scan of the desert, brings with it a glimmer of hope that one day the lost labyrinth may finally emerge once again, offering up its profound secrets to the modern world. The sands of Egypt, it is believed, may hold more than just a forgotten building. They may hold the very keys to understanding the deep spiritual and architectural ingenuity of one of history's most remarkable and enigmatic civilizations. The search for the lost labyrinth is not merely an archaeological quest. It is a profound attempt to uncover a hidden, transformative chapter of Egypt's ancient history, a chapter that, if revealed, could dramatically alter our entire understanding of the ancient world. If the labyrinth were ever found, it would provide unprecedented and invaluable insights into the architecture, the religion, and the intricate daily life of one of the most advanced civilizations in human history. One of the most tantalizing aspects of the labyrinth is the compelling possibility that it harbors ancient Egyptian knowledge that has been tragically lost for millennia. The labyrinth, with its intricate corridors, hidden chambers, and profoundly symbolic carvings, could serve as an invaluable repository of sacred texts or esoteric ritualistic knowledge. Some scholars speculate that it might contain documents that eloquently explain the deeper spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians, potentially shedding illuminating light on the enduring mysteries of the afterlife, the complex pantheon of gods they worshipped, and the elaborate rituals they performed to meticulously ensure the passage of the soul to the next world. If these texts or symbols were indeed preserved within the labyrinth's protective embrace, they could offer an unparalleled glimpse into Egypt's religious practices and spiritual rituals, revealing heretofore unseen aspects of their civilization that have long been obscured by the mists of time. The labyrinth might also offer invaluable new clues about how the ancient Egyptians profoundly viewed the cosmos and their sophisticated understanding of the heavens, which played such a central, guiding role in their vibrant culture. Many believe that the labyrinth's intricate design was not merely an architectural wonder, but also a profound reflection of astronomical alignments or complex cosmological concepts, inextricably tying the physical space to the divine realm. Moreover, the labyrinth's discovery could revolutionize our understanding of ancient Egyptian architecture. The sheer, colossal size and bewildering complexity of the structure, as so vividly described by Herodotus, strongly suggests that it was constructed with advanced engineering techniques that might have profoundly influenced later architectural marvels. Archaeologists are particularly keen to understand how the labyrinth may have influenced the design of other monumental structures like the pyramids and the myriad temples that dotted Egypt's ancient landscape. But the implications extend far beyond just religious or architectural history. The labyrinth could also reveal crucial insights into the social and political structure of ancient Egypt. Was it built solely by the formidable will of a single pharaoh, a singular vision brought to life? Or was it a collaborative, monumental effort that involved countless different workers and skilled craftsmen, suggesting a different societal organization? What does its sheer construction say about the hierarchy and organization of ancient Egyptian society? The discovery of the labyrinth would not just add a new chapter to Egyptology. It would effectively rewrite significant parts of it, bringing forth new revelations about the ancient Egyptian civilization and its unparalleled place in the history of the world. For now, the labyrinth remains stubbornly hidden, a spectral shadow beneath the sands. But with every new piece of evidence uncovered, the possibility of finally finding it draws ever closer. The mysteries of the ancient world are still patiently waiting to be unlocked, and the lost labyrinth may one day emerge from the shadows to reveal its profound, long-held secrets. The lost labyrinth of Egypt has long been perceived as far more than just a physical structure. Its profound symbolic significance, intricately woven into the very fabric of Egyptian culture, has resonated powerfully through history, influencing not only the foundational myths of ancient Egypt, but also the narratives and archetypes of subsequent civilizations. Even in its physical absence, the compelling idea of the labyrinth has continued to captivate the human imagination across millennia. In ancient Egypt, labyrinths were never merely architectural marvels. They were potent symbolic representations of the soul's arduous journey. The maze-like structure of the labyrinth may have been meticulously designed to mirror the difficult and often perilous path the deceased had to navigate in order to successfully reach the afterlife. In Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife was envisioned as a realm replete with formidable challenges, trials, and profound mysteries, where only the worthy would ultimately pass through its guarded gates to attain eternal life. The labyrinth, with its myriad twists and turns, might have served as a powerful metaphor for the soul's transformative journey through these essential trials. The labyrinth's role in Egyptian culture was perhaps also intrinsically linked to the worship of Sobuk, the formidable crocodile god, whose sacred temples were frequently located in the Fayum region. Sobuk was revered as both a powerful creator and a fearsome destroyer, a fundamental duality strikingly reflected in the labyrinth's enigmatic ability to both guide and utterly confound. The potent symbolism of a hidden, mysterious maze with its carefully guarded secrets might have represented the dual, often paradoxical, nature of the divine, both nurturing and terrifying, life-giving and destructive. But the profound influence of the labyrinthine concept did not end with Egypt. As the centuries unfolded, the potent idea of the labyrinth diffused and spread across diverse cultures and mythologies. The most renowned of these myths is undeniably the harrowing tale of the Labyrinth of Crete, ingeniously designed by the legendary craftsman Daedalus. In Greek mythology, this labyrinth was constructed to house the Minotaur, a monstrous creature, half man and half bull. This specific labyrinth, in stark contrast to its Egyptian counterpart, was primarily associated with confusion, fear, and ultimate entrapment, a terrifying place where only those irretrievably lost within its bewildering walls could face inevitable destruction. Over time, the concept of the labyrinth profoundly evolved, taking on a myriad of different meanings across various cultures and eras. In medieval Europe, the labyrinth became a powerful symbol of the spiritual journey, frequently depicted in the intricate mosaic floors of cathedrals as a sacred path for prayer and deep meditation. Pilgrims would physically walk the labyrinth's intricate paths as a tangible symbol of their own spiritual journey towards salvation and divine grace. The enduring idea of the labyrinth as a sacred, transformative space, a space that demands both profound wisdom and unwavering courage to navigate, transcended geographical borders and cultural boundaries, inextricably connecting it to the broader human experience of ceaselessly seeking answers, truth, and ultimate enlightenment. The labyrinth's intrinsic connection to both life and death, as well as its profound association with spiritual trials, ensures its permanent place as a symbol that timelessly transcends all temporal constraints. Whether it was manifested in ancient Egypt, classical Greece, or later religious traditions, the labyrinth has steadfastly remained a powerful and evocative metaphor for the inherent complexities of the human soul and its enduring struggle to find meaning and purpose in a vast, often confusing world. Though the lost labyrinth of Egypt remains resolutely hidden beneath the sands, its symbolic legacy continues to inspire, provoke thought, and challenge our understanding. It serves as a potent reminder that some mysteries, however deeply buried, are timeless, patiently waiting to be uncovered when the world is truly ready to comprehend their deeper, more profound meanings. The search for the lost labyrinth of Egypt is undeniably far from over. And with each passing year, the advent of new technologies and methodologies brings us incrementally closer to uncovering its hidden secrets. Though it has remained tantalizingly elusive for centuries, the labyrinth continues to captivate the imaginations of archaeologists and explorers alike, drawing urgent attention to the mystery of this ancient wonder and the exhilarating possibility of unlocking one of the greatest lost sites of Egypt. The region surrounding Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis continues to be the primary focus of intensive excavations. Many researchers strongly believe that the labyrinth lies buried somewhere near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, a once thriving hub that was notably home to a magnificent temple dedicated to Sobuk, the crocodile god. This specific location is absolutely central to the theories that place the labyrinth in the Fayum, as Herodotus himself explicitly made connections between the two in his seminal writings. In recent decades, advanced technology has breathed vital new life into the search. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, GPR, have empowered researchers to explore vast areas previously inaccessible or utterly unknown, providing crucial new clues about what might lie hidden beneath the surface. These state-of-the-art technologies have enabled archaeologists to detect subtle yet significant signs of hidden structures, even those that might be buried beneath incredibly thick layers of sand and debris. In 2017, an aerial survey meticulously conducted over the Fayum Oasis revealed intriguing anomalies in the terrain, large, rectangular formations that could strongly suggest the presence of substantial ruins or ancient walls, potentially marking the labyrinth's long-sought location. Despite these tantalizing glimpses from above, the vast majority of the labyrinth continues to elude modern discovery. The relentless embrace of the desert, with its eons of accumulated dust and ever-shifting sands, acts as a formidable veil, concealing the full, breathtaking scope of what lies entombed beneath its ancient surface. This enduring mystery has led some prominent scholars and enthusiasts to consider a truly profound possibility that significant portions of the labyrinth might lie submerged beneath the waters of Lake Moeris, often historically referred to as Lake Moeris in more contemporary contexts. This colossal ancient lake, central to the Fayum Oasis, has undergone dramatic transformations in size, shape, and depth over countless millennia due to both natural geological shifts and ancient hydrological engineering projects linked to the Nile. The notion that parts of this architectural marvel could be preserved in the tranquil, dark depths of the lake offers a powerful new paradigm for the search. It reignites hope for a generation of archaeologists and Egyptologists, suggesting that the legendary enigma, long thought lost to the ravages of time and sand, might instead be awaiting rediscovery, held in a silent, aqueous embrace, relatively untouched by the desert's destructive elements. This new frontier of underwater archaeology presents both formidable challenges and the tantalizing promise of an unparalleled find.